Chapter 1378. In his excitement, Belinsky used his business methods to understand the situation in the city, as well as the prices of the various items in the city. As his understanding of the city deepened, he was also deeply shocked by the dazzling array of goods in the city. For example, glass products, perfume, silk, tea leaves, and so on were all used here. Once these things were sold elsewhere, the benefits would be unimaginable. In his excitement, Belinsky took out all of his savings to purchase goods in all city. Gradually he established a relationship with Tang Sheng. Under his intentional roping, the two of them quickly became friends, and he was also able to learn some secrets that no one else knew. For example, if a Han merchant were to purchase goods from Arching, the cost would be reduced by a lot, and they would receive a lot of preferential treatment. For example, Tang Sheng actually had Mongolian blood in him, and his tribe was in the Abelia region, etc. Belinsky had always been an ambitious businessman. After learning about the situation, he had other ideas. For example, he could drive the Han people out of the Far Eastern region and let him personally control everything. That way, his strength would increase by hundreds or even thousands of times in the shortest amount of time. At that time, he would no longer need to run around doing business. At that time, his descendants would no longer have to worry about not having enough to eat. After the ambitious Belinsky left the Far Eastern region, he came to the Siberia region to look for Khan Hurahan. If he wanted to achieve his goal, he needed a powerful partner, and Hurahan was that person in his heart. Hurahan, who was also ambitious, quickly got together with Belinsky. Then they took control of Tang Sheng's tribe and used him as a spy to launch a surprise attack. Without any preparation, Qin Bo was injured and fled, and the Far Eastern region changed hands. In fact, Hurahan was able to live a good life now because of the information and help provided by Belinsky. Therefore, in his heart he still valued this merchant very much. Now he looked at him and wanted to hear if he had any good opinions. This did not disappoint Hurahan. From the perspective of a merchant, Belinsky made a suggestion. Open the city gates and let the commoners out. At the same time, offer a large reward for information on Qin Bo's whereabouts. No matter who it was, what tribe they were from, or what status they had in the past, as long as they could provide information on Qin Bo's whereabouts, they would be rewarded with 50,000 taels of silver. If you can capture him alive and deliver him to me, you will be rewarded with 100,000 taels of silver. Whether it was 50,000 or 100,000, it was not a small number. If they hadn't conquered Arching, even if they sold Hurahan, they wouldn't have been able to gather so much money. But now he had already occupied the Far Eastern state. He had plundered a lot of good things here, but he didn't have time to take away the silver. These mere tens of thousands of silver taels were nothing in his eyes. Great Khan, everyone has a greedy heart. As long as we offer a large enough reward, no one will not be tempted. Once the news spreads, we don't have to worry about Qin Bo not showing up, Belinsky said confidently. This came from his understanding of human nature. In this world, no one didn't like money. All they had to do was provide information and they could get 50,000 taels of silver. They wouldn't be able to finish eating and drinking for the rest of their lives. Who wouldn't be tempted? The so-called loyalty was only because the bargaining chip for betrayal wasn't enough. Now that Belinsky had raised this bargaining chip and was satisfied, anyone with a weak will would know what decision to make. Good, very good. Hu Lihan was overjoyed when he heard that. He just wanted to find Qin Bo and use him to find the 1,000,000 dan of grain. He didn't care about the process. A huge net was set up to find Qin Bo. At this time, Qin Bo didn't know that someone had put a bounty on his head. He didn't even know that Yang Qindong had led the army into the Far East. At this time he was suffering from a fever in a forest 50 miles east of Arching, enduring a life-and-death crisis. It's still not working. He's still burning, the captain of the guards, Xia Qian, said worriedly after removing his hand from Qin Bo's forehead. If it doesn't work, then boil some water. The commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division, Kong He, clenched and unclenched his right fist. He seemed to have made a decision. Tang Sheng's sudden attack had caught Qin Bo off guard. He had been stabbed while running away. Fortunately, the Far Eastern Army had a complete set of traditional Chinese medicine, so a knife wound wasn't fatal. However, Qin Bo hadn't had a good rest. His wound had become infected while he was running, causing him to have a high fever. Although the wound was no longer inflamed, if the fever didn't subside, his life would still be in danger. Scalding one's feet with hot water was a good way to get rid of the fever. Everyone who studied under Yang Shui knew this. However, the problem was that they were in a state of hibernation. They couldn't boil water and smoke to attract attention. If Qin Bo woke up, he would never allow such a thing to happen. However, this was a matter of life and death. When Qin Bo wasn't awake, Commander Kong he took his position and gave this order. Okay, let's be careful. The captain of the guards, Xia Qian, nodded and ordered someone to make the arrangements. He himself didn't leave Qin Bo's side at all times. He even had a short knife with him. Following Tang Sheng's rebellion, it was hard for Xia Qian to trust anyone. Speaking of which, it was precisely because of Tang Sheng's rebellion that Qin Bo became vigilant. He firmly grasped the military power in his hands and gave the order when he was running away. Without his military order and Tiger Tally, even the three commanders couldn't mobilize the soldiers of the Far Eastern Army. As a result, the counterattack couldn't be carried out and the three divisions could only find a place to hide. If he wanted to turn the situation around, the first thing he had to do was to wake Qin Bo up. In order to achieve this goal, Xia Qian didn't care whether he would be discovered or not. Since no matter what he did, it would be contradictory. He would just choose the lesser of two evils. They naturally didn't lack firewood in the mountains. The only problem was that once they did this, smoke would inevitably be produced. This was a dangerous thing that could easily expose their location. As a result, even though the guards were extremely careful, there was still smoke coming out of the forest. It was spotted by the Mongolian scouts who were searching nearby. However, due to the distance, he couldn't immediately go forward to investigate. After thinking for a moment, he turned his horse around and rushed towards a nearby Mongolian army. Just as this Mongolian scout was about to leave, there was another cavalry scout about 8 li away who also saw this scene and left. The hot water was finally boiled. The unconscious Qin Bo was supported by Xia Qian as he placed his feet into the tub of hot water. With a cry, Qin Bo woke up from the hot water and slowly fainted again. Fortunately, after soaking in the hot water, his body began to sweat. After 2 hours, his body temperature began to drop and Qin Bo woke up again. With the fever temporarily gone, Qin Bo's spirit seemed to be much better. With Xia Qian's support, he forced himself to sit up. He first looked at the tub that was still warm and frowned. "You guys started a fire?" "Yes, it was my order." The 2nd Cavalry Division's commander, Kong He, took a step forward and took responsibility. Beside him, Commander Xia Qian also followed up and said, "I also agree." Hearing that they had started a fire, Qin Bo sighed. At this moment he didn't know what to say. However, since the fire had already started, it was too late to say anything. He could only hope that no one would discover them. "Alright, let's not talk about this matter. This place could be exposed at any moment. We need to leave this place immediately and look for another safe place. Commander, the 2nd Cavalry Division is nearby. Should we gather with them?" Knowing that the commander would make such an arrangement, Division Commander Kong He volunteered. "No." Qin Bo shook his head and said decisively, "We are in danger at any moment. Tang Xing has rebelled. No one knows if there are any spies in the army. For the safety of the army, we cannot take the initiative to contact anyone." A person couldn't fall in the same place twice. Qin Bo's method was understandable. Although it was a little passive, it was better in terms of safety. After the other 3 divisions went into martial law, it could indeed ensure their safety to the greatest extent. However, this way the military would be in danger. "It's fine. With our guard division, we will protect the general's safety even if we have to risk our lives." As the commander, Xia Qian had a determined expression. Although the guard division had suffered heavy losses on the way out of Al-Air City, there were less than 200 people left from the original 2,000 people. However, even if there was only one person left, they had to arrange for the general to be sent out. Good. Hearing Xia Qian's attitude, Qin Bo patted the back of his hand in satisfaction. Then, his face was covered by a layer of worry. "Sai, it's a pity that our radio is broken and we can't contact the outside world. The situation here can't be spread out in time. I think the 6th young master must be worried sick." Qin Bo temporarily regained consciousness. However, it didn't eliminate the possibility of him having a high fever at any moment. After all, the hot water treatment didn't solve the problem. Without a safe environment to rest, the fever could reappear at any moment. Using this time, the guard division made the decision to move. However, just as everyone was packing up and Qin Bo was being carried onto a military stretcher, a soldier hurriedly came to report that there was a large group of Mongolian cavalry outside the mountain. There were at least 1,000 of them. "They found us so quickly?" Whether it was Kong He or Xia Qian, their faces sank. Chapter 1379. Maybe this is fate. How about this, you guys go first and I'll cover you. Remember, no one can have the right to mobilize the army without an order. If I die, then wait for the 6th young master to send a new commander to give the order. In comparison, Qin Bo's expression was calmer, as if everything that happened was not out of his expectations. "No, if we're leaving, we'll leave together," Xia Qian and Kong He said almost at the same time. As the captain of the guards, protecting Qin Bo was his most important task. Once the commander was in trouble, he would naturally not be able to avoid punishment. It was understandable that he would say such words. However, Kong He was the commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division, so he did not need to do this. However, Kong He still made such a decision. When Qin Bo heard it, he could not help but sigh. He could understand Kong He. He was originally the commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division, but because he was worried about his illness, he took the initiative to leave the division. Now, it was not impossible for him to return to the division, but after he returned, he would probably only be able to hide in the dark and would not be able to mobilize the army. After Tang Sheng's rebellion, without Qin Bo's orders, even the commander could not mobilize the army. He felt that this commander had no authority. Instead of going back to hide, he might as well kill the enemy here and leave his life or death to the heavens. In fact, Qin Bo used to trust Commander Kong He very much. Otherwise, he would not have arranged for him to guard the nest in the far eastern region when he sent troops to rescue Beginning City. However, since there was a problem with Tang Sheng as the commander, he had given the order that the army should not move without orders, so he had to treat everyone equally. Sighing, Qin Bo knew that it was impossible to chase the two of them away. He could only speak while he was still conscious. "Since that's the case, let's move to a safe place now. Let's go." After Xia Qian agreed, he ordered the guards to speed up. At the same time, he sent out scouts to scout the enemy's situation. He wanted to find an opening where the enemy was weak to charge out. There were 1,000 Mongolian cavalrymen surrounding this area. They were quite lucky and were patrolling this area. When they heard the report from the scouts, they rushed over with the intention of giving it a try. Unexpectedly, they really bumped into a big fish. Although he wasn't sure if the person who was surrounded was a general from the Far Eastern region, it was already a great achievement that he was able to fight back. The Mongolian general's eyes glowed with excitement as he said, "Don't be in a rush to attack. We need to surround them before we attack. In any case, we cannot let a single person escape." It had to be said that these Mongol cavalry were quite strong. After roaming the Siberian region for many years, they had unique experience in fighting cavalry in mountainous regions. In this aspect, even the 5-star army that had been through hundreds of battles would not be their match. This was also the main reason why Yang Qindong did not immediately head for Arching, but instead set up an ambush beside the Amuga River. It was because they were good at fighting in the mountains that the 1,000 Mongolian cavalrymen did not take the Far Eastern army seriously. In their eyes, the Far Eastern army was just a defeated opponent. Therefore, after the order was given, they did not rush to surround the Far Eastern army. This made Xia Qian and the others, who were in the middle of the encirclement, very anxious. They were already prepared to fight back with all their might when the enemy charged at them. They were also prepared to look for a weak point to break out of the encirclement. However, the enemy did not panic and continued to shrink the encirclement. In this way, it would be hard to say if there was a weak point. They are still not in a rush to charge. We have to make the first move. Xia Qian was not a stubborn person. Otherwise, he would not have become the captain of the guards. After thinking deeply, he made a decision. He wanted to counterattack first and see if he could disrupt the enemy's formation and find a way to break out of the encirclement. "Let me go. You have to stay behind and ensure the safety of the general. This is the most important thing." Kong He stood up again and made his decision to lead the troops. "No. This is my responsibility as the captain of the guards. How can I let Mr. Kong take the risk?" Xia Qian shook his head and said, "What do you mean by taking the risk? Do you think we will be safe if we stay here?" Kong He did not back down. Obviously, the two of them saw the danger in front of them. Instead of sitting here and waiting for death, they might as well charge out and fight the enemy to their heart's content. At least they could kill a few enemies. The two of them were still arguing. Neither of them had the intention to back down. On the outside, the Mongolian cavalrymen were getting closer and closer to them. The encirclement was also shrinking. It looked like the battle would start at any moment. However, they did not know that behind them, there was a group of cavalrymen quickly gathering and closing in on them. They were the vanguard that Yang Qindong sent out. They were the vanguard led by Dai Qua, the former commander of the Far Eastern Army's 1st Cavalry Division. Considering that Dai Qua was familiar with the situation here, Yang Qindong sent him out to see if he could find Qin Bo's position. When the time was right, he would coordinate with him from the inside. Based on his understanding of the military commander, Dai Qua searched a few places but did not find anything. When he once again marked out a region and wanted to continue searching, a scout reported that he saw smoke floating out from the mountains. He immediately brought a group of cavalrymen and rushed over. Considering that the information had not been confirmed and he was not sure if this was the location of the Far Eastern Army, Dai Qu did not increase his speed. He was very careful to avoid being discovered by the Mongolian scouts. It was only when the scout at the front reported that they found many Mongolian cavalrymen outside the mountain and that they were moving forward that Dai Qu disregarded everything and rushed over. Since the Mongolian cavalrymen were moving, there must be a target here. Wouldn't their target be the Far Eastern Army that he was looking for? Thinking that he was finally going to find the missing army, Dai Qu was a little excited. He could not help but increase the speed of his army. One side was moving at full speed, while the other side was slowly encircling. With one increasing and one decreasing, the distance between the two sides was quickly closing. A huge battle was brewing in the forest. Reporting, a large number of unknown cavalrymen have appeared behind us. The Mongolian scouts were not incompetent. Dai Qu's actions behind them finally attracted their attention. At this moment, the distance between the two sides was less than 10 li 20 li of open land and 10 li of forest. This was the distance that the scouts usually patrolled. When the Mongolian general Ulu heard the news, he was not worried but happy. Didn't this prove that they had caught a big fish? Otherwise, why would so many enemy cavalrymen appear? Can you see how many people there are? Ulu's voice carried a trace of excitement and agitation as he asked. There are too many trees so I can't be sure. However, there should be no less than 1,000 people. The scout first shook his head and then thought carefully before explaining. Okay. Hearing that there were no less than 1,000 people, Ulu was even more delighted. If there were too many enemies, he might have to consider whether or not he had the strength to fight. However, if they were on the same level as him, he had nothing to worry about. With the same number of soldiers, his cavalrymen were better at fighting in the mountains. He was confident that he could deal a heavy blow to the enemy. Send down the order. Apart from leaving 200 men to keep an eye on the target in the mountains, everyone else get ready to charge. Ulu decided to take down this group of enemy cavalrymen. In order to obtain the merit, he did not have the intention to report it to his superiors. This caused him to lose the last chance to kill Qinbo. After the 1,000 Mongolian cavalrymen received the order, they continued to advance slowly on the surface, shrinking the encirclement. However, they were secretly prepared to turn around and fight at any moment. Dai Qu, who was quickly approaching from behind, did not notice this. He did not care who was surrounded. Based on the principle that an enemy of an enemy was a friend, he had to save them. As for whether or not he could defeat them, he was still confident. He was once a member of the Far Eastern Army, so Dai Qu naturally knew about the strength of some Mongolian cavalrymen. Because the enemy had lived here since young, they were used to fighting in the mountains. If it was a one-on-one, he did not have much confidence. However, the scouts had reported that the enemy only had 1,000 cavalrymen. In terms of numbers, he had twice the enemies. Furthermore, he had led the army through the baptism of war. Many of the soldiers were not veterans, but they had been through life and death situations. With double the number advantage, he was confident that he could defeat the enemy. Both sides had their own plans and the distance between them was getting closer and closer. 10 miles, 8 miles, 6 miles. When they were only 3 miles away, they could hear the sound of horse hooves in the forest. The 800 Mongolian cavalrymen who were already prepared started to counterattack. They suddenly turned their horses around. As they ran back, they took out their bows. Charge, kill them all. Dai Qu took the lead and rushed to the front. When he vaguely saw the shadows of many enemies flashing from behind some trees, he didn't hold back and shouted loudly. When enemies meet on a narrow path, the brave will win. In the dense forest, the speed of the warhorse was not much of an advantage. Whoever was braver and more courageous would naturally have the advantage. There was no need for anyone to give any orders. When the distance between the two sides was less than an arrow's distance, many bows and arrows were shot from all directions towards the approaching 5-star army's cavalry. Ding ding dang dang, the sound of arrows clashing with cavalry swords could be heard. The 5-star army soldiers did not show any signs of fear and continued to charge forward. Even though along the way some of their soldiers were shot off their horses, and some even died from the arrows, this did not stop them from advancing. The 5-star army's rules were very strict. When the general gave the order, even if there was a mountain of blades and a sea of flames in front of them, as long as there was no order to stop, they were not allowed to take a step back. Chapter 1380. Under the strict military rules, the 2,000 cavalry did not retreat at all. They could only continue to advance, closing the distance between the two sides. At the same time, the archers started to reflect the arrows. In terms of archery, the 5-star army had put in a lot of effort into training. Even though most of the Mongolian cavaliers had used the geographical advantage to hide behind some trees, the retaliation from the 5-star army's archers still brought quite a lot of pressure to them. Even though their damage was not as great as when they were on the plains, they still managed to suppress the enemy's archers. After the 5-star army paid the price of 200 cavalry casualties, they managed to close the distance between the two sides, and their advantage in numbers showed. This also forced the Mongol army, which only had 800 cavalry, to retreat. Yu, who was leading 200 cavalry to wait for news of the army's victory, suddenly heard that the battle was not going well and that the army was being forced to retreat. A look of panic flashed across his eyes. It was not as if he had never seen the strength of the Far East Army before. Tang Xing, the commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division, was not the only one who had surrendered. He had led an entire division of more than 8,000 men. As one of the Mongol generals, Yu had seen the training of the Far Eastern Army. It was really normal, and compared to them they were more than 10% weaker. Logically speaking, such an army should not be hard to defeat. As long as the arrows successfully suppressed the enemy until they couldn't even raise their heads, then they could find a suitable moment to suddenly attack. With the momentum of a tiger leaping down the mountain, it was possible to destroy the enemy's formation. At the same time, the enemy's fighting spirit and morale would also be destroyed. Once the morale of the army was messed up, no general would be able to turn the tables. As such, before this battle, Yu was really confident. However, who would have thought that the enemy would be so strong? In just a short time, they had actually charged over and forced his army to retreat? Yu's face was filled with confusion, wondering how the strength of the Far Eastern Army had suddenly increased by so much. Suddenly, another wave of battle cries entered his ears. When he looked over in panic, he saw hundreds of Far Eastern Army suddenly attacking. Without enough preparation, his remaining 200 cavalry were actually suppressed. The ones attacking were the 200 guards who stayed by Qin Bo's side. They had also heard the battle cries from the mountains. Based on their intuition, they knew that the reinforcements had arrived. Logically speaking, without Qin Bo's tiger tally, the various divisions could not act rashly. However, since the reinforcements had arrived, they naturally had to do something. After some discussion, Kong He and Xia Qian each led 100 warriors and rushed down the mountain from 2 different directions. They used practical actions to support the reinforcements, to create a center. Facing enemies from 2 sides, even though Yu was filled with reluctance, he still decisively gave the order to retreat. He had already thought it through. Since he did not have the appetite to swallow up the Far Eastern Army, he would ask for reinforcements. After all, he was the one who discovered these enemies, so he would definitely get the credit. What he needed to do next was to keep an eye on these targets. The Mongolian cavalry suddenly retreated. However, whether it was Dai Qua, Kong He, or Xia Qian, none of them had any intention of chasing. They tried to get closer, wanting to see the other party's identity. Marching. Before Yu's battle report reached here, Ayaheki appeared first. With the token from General Nanlidi, Ayaheki successfully met General Akmo. Following which, he followed Yang Qindong's instructions and told him about the 5-star army that had come to help the Far Eastern Army. Hearing that the Far Eastern Army's reinforcements had appeared, Akmo did not dare to delay and quickly brought Ayaheki to meet Khagan Hulahan. Within the Khagan's tent, Hulahan called Belinsky and Tang Xing over to listen to the report. Along the way, Ayaheki had already memorized Yang Qindong's instructions countless times. After seeing Hulahan, apart from the initial panic, he was able to think clearly and tell him everything. Based on Ayaheki's description, the 5-star army only had 10,000 reinforcements, but the amount of supplies they brought was endless. There was no end to the carriages. While saying this, Ayaheki noticed that both Hulahan and Akmu's eyes were filled with desire. Obviously, they were stimulated by the spoils of war. On the other hand, Belinsky seemed to be in deep thought, but it was hard to tell what he was thinking about. There really are countless carriages? Hulahan did not think too deeply about it. He just wanted to confirm whether Ayaheki's words were true or not. Yes, I dare to use my head as a guarantee, Ayaheki said confidently. Haha, good. Hulahan laughed loudly, then his gaze fell on Tang Xing and asked, General Tang, you know the most about the 5-star army. Tell me about it. Yes. Tang Xing cupped his fists and replied, about the 5-star army, this subordinate has come into contact with them once. He had seen them on the grassland when he and Commander Qin Bo were rescuing the beginning city. To be honest, they are very powerful and have a lot of troops. If we were to fight them on the grasslands, I'm afraid we wouldn't be their match. Oh, they're that powerful? Houlihan felt uncomfortable all over when he heard this. After all, the strength of the enemy always made him feel uneasy. Yes, they are very powerful. When the five-star army launched their attack, the hundreds of thousands of cavalrymen of the Wala tribe and the hundreds of thousands of soldiers of the great Ming dynasty were no match for them. Tang Sheng recalled the scene that had happened in front of him and sighed. He even thought about whether his betrayal of the five-star army was a good thing or a bad thing. However, it was already done and it was meaningless to dwell on it now. He threw the pressure brought by the five-star army to the back of his mind and continued, but that's only in an open area like in a mountain forest. I think they can't even use 30% of their usual strength. In addition, the Far East is vast with many mountains and lakes, and the roads are difficult to travel. It's not convenient for the army to move, and the transportation of food is also extremely difficult. In comparison, there's nothing to be afraid of. Houlihan was initially shocked by the might of the five-star army, but when he heard Tang Sheng's words, he couldn't help but nod his head and say, "That's right, this is the Far East, not the grasslands. No matter how strong the five-star army is, they won't be able to send their army here. Otherwise, just the rations alone will cause them to fall into chaos. In the end, this is our territory. Since they want to extend their tentacles here, we might as well cut them off and let them know who has the final say here." Houlihan, who already had a plan, changed his tone after saying this. He looked at Akmu and said, "Great General, this Khan will give you 10,000 elite troops. Do you have the confidence to defeat the five-star army and bring back all the supplies they brought?" As the great general of the Mongolian army, Akmu was definitely a fierce general. It could be said that he wasn't afraid of anything. When Tang Sheng said that the five-star army was so powerful, he snorted disdainfully. He wanted to prove that he was the strongest when he had the chance. Now that he had been chosen, there was no reason for him to disagree. He immediately said loudly, "Don't worry, Great Khan, 10,000 elite troops will be enough to take care of this five-star army reinforcements." Haha, as expected of a great general. "Good, if that's the case, then this Khan will wait to hear your good news." Houlihan laughed loudly. Clearly he was in a good mood. Yes. A proud expression flashed across Akmu's face as he turned and left. Belinsky and Tang Sheng then left as well. After walking out of Houlihan's residence, Belinsky suddenly stopped in his tracks and looked at Tang Sheng, asking, "General Tang, the five-star army only has about 10,000 cavalrymen. Why do we need to bring so many supplies when we're out?" Tang Sheng chuckled and said, "The five-star army doesn't lack money at all. Although they have been fighting in the north and south for the past few years, I have never heard of a shortage of resources. Every time they go to war, they will bring enough supplies and supplies. This has already become a habit." "I see." After hearing this, Belinsky couldn't help but reveal a look of shock. Earlier he was wondering if this was a trap set by the five-star army. Now it seemed that he was thinking too much. However, when he thought about how rich the five-star army's resources were, he couldn't help but yearn for it. Unfortunately, he had already joined forces with Houlihan and offended the five-star army. It would be difficult for him to cooperate with them in the future. Not long after Belinsky and Tang Sheng left the residence, another scout came to see them. They were sent by General Ulu to ask for reinforcements. When Houlihan heard that he had found traces of the Far Eastern army, he was naturally overjoyed. However, he didn't immediately send troops to eliminate them. In his opinion, the Far Eastern army was already a dish in his bowl that could be picked up at any time. Instead, the five-star army was the target that needed to be dealt with immediately. He was afraid that if he was late, the five-star army would run away. "Go back and tell General Ulu that this Khan will send 1,000 cavalry to help. Have them keep an eye on the Far Eastern army. When General Akmu returns in triumph, it will be time to send troops to deal with the Far Eastern army." Houlihan made the decision to deal with the five-star army first before dealing with the Far Eastern army. What he didn't expect was that this move would give the Far Eastern army, which was already on the verge of death, time to breathe. This would sow the seeds of his defeat. General Dai Qua led the army to meet up with Division Commander Kong He in the mountains. Then he went to see Commander Chin Bo, who had fainted once again. After the temperature dropped again, Commander Chin Bo slowly woke up. When he opened his eyes and saw Dai Qua, his originally dispirited aura also became excited. "Division Commander Dai, why are you here? Did the reinforcements arrive?" Chapter 1381. Yes, General. The sixth young master has arrived personally. He's bringing close to 100,000 soldiers and logistical personnel towards Al City. Dai Qua held Qin Bo's hand tightly as he spoke in an equally excited manner. What? The sixth young master has arrived personally? Ah, that's great. Cough, cough, cough. Qin Bo coughed violently because he was too excited. Sir, please take care of your body, Dai Qua said with concern when he saw Qin Bo's face turning red. It's fine, it's fine. The sixth young master is here. I'll get better soon. Haha. Qin Bo laughed again after he panted for a while. Although his fever had not completely subsided, it was obvious that he was in a better mood. Dai Qua was relieved when he saw that Qin Bo seemed to be in a good mood. Without this person he would not be a commander. He was grateful to his savior, so he asked for instructions when he spoke. Sir, I brought a radio this time. Do you have anything to say to the sixth young master? Radio? That's great. Report the Far Eastern Army situation to the sixth young master immediately and ask for further instructions. Qin Bo's expression became more excited. He looked like he wanted to receive Yang Qindong's reply right away. The radio was taken out and the report was sent out immediately after it was connected. Qin Bo narrated in detail about the fall of Arqing and Qin Bo's suspicions about some of the officers in the army. Before his suspicions were resolved, he did not dare to gamble with the army. Therefore, he did not move the army without permission and reported the situation one by one. When the radio was sent out, Yang Qindong, who was far away at the Amuga River, had already dug a pocket. He was just waiting for the Mongolian cavalry to enter. At that moment, Commander Dai Qua's telegram was sent to him. Yang Qindong calmly read the contents of the telegram. He wasn't angry, nor was he angry. As a lone army, the Far Eastern Army had been subjected to all kinds of tests ever since it was established. Due to geographical reasons, they couldn't get the support of the 5-star Army headquarters. This caused problems to arise during the construction process. The process of taking a new path had always been tortuous. Yang Qindong had long anticipated that there would be various problems. It was just that he had suffered a huge loss this time. Even the city was lost, which was far beyond his expectations. Fortunately, according to the telegram, the other supplies from the first city in Chichen City were stored in another safe place and were not lost. This could be considered a blessing in disguise. As for what Qin Bo said about the problems in the army, Yang Qindong could understand. After all, other than the initial part of the Far Eastern Army soldiers, the rest were recruited from the local area. Such an army would not have any problems if nothing happened. However, once they encountered adversity, it was hard to say. However, no matter what, Qin Bo's method of dealing with it was still good. He completely hid the army and controlled them. He did not allow any of them to go out. This could ensure that the army would not fall into chaos. Of course, this was not a good plan. At least it was not a long-term plan. Fortunately, Yang Qindong was here. All of this would not be a problem anymore. Come, send a telegram to Qin Bo, tell him that he can release the army. Tell him not to worry about the problems in the army. If there are problems, solve them. If the pustules don't show up, there are always hidden dangers. Now it's time to dig out these tumors. With his hands behind his back, Yang Qindong's aura surged, giving people a feeling of omnipotence. This time, since he came to the Far Eastern region, he naturally had to solve the problem. It would be fine if those disloyal people were honest. However, if they dared to do anything extreme, he did not mind using some heads as a sacrifice. Facing the foreign races, Yang Qindong would never be polite when he raised his butcher's knife. The telegram was quickly sent back. Yang Qindong also returned his thoughts to the present. Just now, the scouts had reported that the 10,000 Mongolian cavalry reinforcements had already left Arqing and were heading towards the Amuga River. They didn't even bring any rations with them. It was obvious that they were here with the intention of plundering. They would appear in front of him in 3 days. Come to die. Yang Qindong walked out of the tent and looked in the direction of Arqing. He saw countless 5-star army soldiers digging horse traps. His eyes were filled with anticipation. Akmu personally led the 10,000 Mongolian cavalry and rushed day and night. In less than 3 days they were 30 miles away from the Amuga River. The scouts had already been sent out and there would be news soon. While arranging for the army to rest, Akmu also waited for the news from the scouts. He had already prayed to Tingri more than once that the 5-star army would not escape. Perhaps the prayers were effective, as the scouts returned and reported that the 5-star army was just 20 miles away from them. That's right. When he heard that the enemy was not 30 miles away but 20 miles away, Akmu heaved a sigh of relief. This was enough to prove that the 5-star army had been rushing and not waiting at the same spot. If the 5-star army's position did not change a few days ago, He would have thought that the enemy already knew that he was coming and had prepared a trap for him. But now the enemy had left their original position. This was enough to prove that his suspicions were unnecessary. In the past few days the 5-star army had only rushed a few dozen miles. Not only did this not make Akmu think too much, it even made him look down on them. Just from the speed of the other party's movement, they were not a strong army at all. Naturally, his confidence in this battle had risen a little. Pass down the order. The army should have a good rest. We will attack the camp tonight. All right, let the people guarding a heki relax and prepare some good food for him. Akmu said with a relaxed expression. He had some suspicions about a heki before, so he arranged for people to watch him. Now that he did not have so many suspicions, he did not need to watch him too closely. Who knows, he might be a meritorious official. As the general that the Khan of Siberia relied on the most, Akmu was very proud and also very careful. He did not even send people to contact General Ulu. He decided to send a message after the attack tonight. This way he could guarantee that he would take all the credit and not leak any information before the attack. It had to be said that this kind of consideration was very careful. But this time the opponent was Yang Qindong. He was a war god who had carried out countless dangerous missions in both his previous life and this life. If they had to be compared, then one was the bright moon in the sky and the other was the light of a firefly. There was no comparison at all. Even though Akmu used all his methods, none of his actions could escape from Yang Qindong's grasp. When he learned from his scouts that the Mongolian cavaliers had entered a resting state while he was 20 miles away, he predicted that they might come to ambush the camp at night. After calling Tianhu, Beta Persei and the others, Yang Qindong gave the order to meet the enemy tonight. The two people who admired Yang Qindong very much did not hesitate to turn around and make the arrangements. According to the agreement, once the Mongolian army made a move, Ba Daojiang, who followed Ulu, should send a message. But now there was no news, so it was a bit hasty to prepare to meet the enemy. But the order was given by Yang Qindong, so no one doubted it. Time quickly passed from noon to afternoon, and then the sky slowly darkened. The scouts sent a message through the radio. The Mongolian cavalry had indeed begun to move. They had moved. After receiving this news, Beta Persei was not surprised at all. Since the young master said that they would come at night, then they would definitely come. Send a message to Ba Daojiang. Once the battle starts, tell them to surround Akmu from the back and try to kill as many enemies as possible. Yang Qindong said confidently with his hands behind his back. This time he was not greedy to the point that he would not let even one enemy escape. After all, it was 10,000 cavalry and he only had a little more than 10,000 troops. It would not be a problem to heavily injure the enemy, but it would be too difficult to kill them all. In other words, after this battle, the 5-star army's strength would be known to the Siberian Mongolian cavalry. As long as the enemy did not have a pig's brain, they would definitely think of a way to leave this place. Taking advantage of this opportunity, they would kill as many enemies as they could. The 5-star army had already made their preparations. They had dug a big hole and were only waiting for the enemy to walk into it. Akmu, who did not know this, was indeed walking step by step towards the abyss. After the sky darkened, Akmu, as the general, gave the order to attack. 10,000 Mongol cavalrymen got on their horses and charged over in a grand manner, causing the birds in the forest to fly into the air in a panic. They seemed to have sensed the powerful killing intent as well. It was only a distance of 20 miles. And the Mongolian vanguard who had already planned out the best route took less than an hour to reach the area 2 miles away from the 5-star army's camp. At this moment, the 5-star army's camp was in a state of panic. It gave people the feeling that they did not expect anyone to attack them at this moment. They were completely unprepared. Get into formation. When Akmu arrived with the main force of the Mongolian cavalry, he also saw this scene. Immediately, his face was filled with joy. The chaos in the enemy camp made him look like a cat playing with a mouse. In order for the cavalry to unleash their full potential, they had to display their ferocious offensive abilities during the charge. Only by doing so would they be able to severely injure their opponents at the first moment and gain the initiative on the battlefield. This also required them to spread out in a formation that was dense enough and not obstructed each other at the same time to ensure that their combat strength could be better displayed. Chapter 1382. Charge. Akmu, who saw that the formation had spread out, could not wait to give the order to charge. When the Mongol soldiers heard the horn, they shouted and rode their horses over. As the distance got closer and closer, they readied their bows and waited, aiming at the 5-star army soldiers wearing military green uniforms one after another. Shio shio shio. Shio shio shio. When the distance between the two sides reached the range of the arrows seemed to have grown eyes and shot towards the soldiers of the 5-star army who were running back and forth in the camp without the need for any orders. In a short time, more than 100 5-star army soldiers were killed or injured by the arrows. Such a glorious result greatly boosted the morale of the Mongol cavalry. This was especially true for the cavalrymen at the very front. They had already disregarded the formation and charged forward as if they would not be able to kill the enemy and gain merit if they were a step too late. The hope of victory had already made them lose their sight. These Mongolian cavaliers did not notice that the so-called 5-star soldier they had killed actually looked very similar to them. In reality, these people were the Mongol captives that Yang Qindong had captured. Before the war, Yang Qindong had promised these people that if they were lucky enough to survive this war, they would be exempted from the death penalty. After that, they would only need to work in arching for 3 years before regaining their freedom. With the temptation of death in front of them, these surrendered soldiers had no choice but to fight. Almost 2,000 captives wanted to fight. However, the flames of war were merciless and swords and spears had no eyes. Soon, more than 200 people were killed or injured, and this number was constantly increasing, causing waves of cries for help. Akhma did not know about this. When he saw so many 5-star army soldiers die in front of him, he was completely blinded by victory. At that moment, he seemed to see countless treasures piled up in front of him for him to take. Not only Akhmu, more and more Mongol cavalry were deeply stimulated by this temporary victory. They shouted and swung their swords. Sometimes there would even be laughter after they hit their targets. It's about time. Under a big tree at the periphery of the battlefield, Yang Qindong saw that the enemy's front and middle troops had entered the pocket. His eyes finally showed a hint of killing intent. He looked at Beta Persei beside him and said, "Blow the horn of charge." Beep 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 beep. The loud horn suddenly sounded in the silent night. It was like a clap of thunder in the ears of the Mongol cavalry. After the bugle call sounded, the wooden planks around the camp of the 5-star army were suddenly removed, revealing wide and long horse traps. The sharp treetops in the pits were like ogres with their bloody mouths wide open, waiting for their prey to enter. The sudden sound of the horn and the pits around them scared the Mongol cavalry who had already charged into the 5-star army's camp. Their first thought they had fallen into a trap. They looked around like birds startled by the twang of a bow, and their eyes filled with fear. What's going on? As the commander of the army, Akhmu was also trapped in the camp. After the sudden change in the situation, his face turned completely gloomy. His years of experience on the battlefield told him that things were bad. But in front of so many soldiers he didn't want to admit this. So after shouting, he looked at a wooden box placed in the tent and shouted, "Men, pry open this box for this general." Yes. 2 soldiers stepped forward after receiving the order. Then a hole was opened in the wooden box under the great force. Then a cry of surprise sounded, "This is an empty box." What? Empty? Akhmu's face changed drastically. Then he pointed at the other wooden boxes and some jars and shouted, "Open, open all of them." In an instant, a group of soldiers rushed forward. But the result was not good. The wooden boxes were all empty. There was something in the jars, but it was not wine. It was kerosene. Not good, it's kerosene. Be careful of a fire attack. Akhmu cried out. As if to coordinate with him, countless torches suddenly appeared around the camp, illuminating the area as brightly as day. Countless cavalrymen were holding fire arrows ready to fire. Surrender and you can live. Those who resist will die. The voice of persuasion sounded out again. Beta Persei's loud voice was used again. Surrender? You must be dreaming. Looking around, he realized that all the soldiers behind him had already fled. Not only that, but the 5-star army around the tent had also fled at some point. Seeing that there was nothing to gain, Akhmu shouted angrily, "We have more people. Don't be afraid of them. Listen to my orders and charge out." He knew that he had sinned heavily. Once he was captured by the 5-star army, he would not have a good ending. Thus, Akhmu decided to take a risk. After the commanding general gave the order, the soldiers were also encouraged. They shouted loudly and were about to charge out on their horses. However, before they could charge forward, Yang Air had already given the order to shoot. Following that, tens of thousands of arrows were released in unison, bringing with them countless sparks as they rained down on the camp. The curtains of the tents were flammable to begin with, and with the help of the kerosene very soon, a huge net of fire rose from the places where the fire arrows landed, and it wrapped around the Mongolian cavaliers one after another. When a person was faced with fire, perhaps a person with mental fortitude could remain calm. But war horses could not. When their pupils were filled with flames, they went berserk. No matter how their master ordered them, they no longer obeyed. Instead, they each rushed towards the safe zone they thought was the safest place. The war horses that charged out, no matter which direction they went, were all waiting for them in the wide horse traps. The sound of wooden stakes entering flesh could be heard, and the war horses that were still alive just a moment ago turned into dead horses one after another. The Mongolian cavaliers riding on their backs did not fare much better either. Most of the time they were buried with the war horses before they died. The fire was everywhere and they could not stay there. There were also huge horse traps waiting for them outside. The Mongol cavalry were stuck in a dilemma. As the commander, Akin could not do anything. He could only watch as one soldier after another charged out and died in the pits. If they were surrounded by the fire, they would be burned to death. There were 8,000 Mongolian elite cavaliers, and other than the soldiers who were not part of the 5-star army, most of them died in this predicament where they could neither advance nor retreat. The fire burned for nearly an hour, causing the surroundings to be filled with the smell of roasted meat, which made people want to vomit. However, there were some who were lucky and did not die in the fire. After a full hour of torment, the fire around them gradually became smaller, and the surrounding horse traps were also filled with human and horse corpses. They finally saw the hope of charging out. "Charge with me." Akmu, who saw the hope of survival, had a black face. Although his personal guards had tried their best to protect him from being burned to death, the smell of smoke and fire did not feel good. Now that he finally had a chance to show off his skills, he hollered out and was about to launch a counterattack. At this moment, Akmu had close to 1,000 soldiers who could still fight. There were also 2,000 to 3,000 injured soldiers. Although they couldn't win with these, it was still possible to carve out a path of blood. In the hearts of many Mongolian cavalry, they were invincible on their horses. They were like their ancestors, invincible on their horses. It was good to have confidence, but too much confidence was asking for death. Especially when they were facing the elites of the 5-star army, who specialized in beating up the Mongolian cavalry. From the moment they charged, their fates were already decided. "Soldiers, charge with me." Jianghu, who had been waiting by the side, pulled out his 2 cavalry swords. He had wanted to experience the skills of the Siberian Mongol cavalry. If it was not for Yang Qindong's plan, he would have charged out long ago. Luckily, there were still a few thousand enemies left on the battlefield, which was enough for the number 1 cavalry army to practice their swords. A truly strong army did not depend on how hard they trained. Instead, they needed to have enough battle experience. Soldiers who had not been on the battlefield were all fake and could only be considered armchair strategists. Luckily, the world was huge and there were many whetstones for the 5-star army. After Tianhu gave the order, the cavalry surged out behind him. It was as if everyone knew that there was more soup than meat, and they were afraid that if they were late, they would not be able to obtain any merits. The wolves moved, and after the soldiers of the number 1 cavalry army charged, a killing intent filled the sky as they charged at the charging Mongolian cavalry. That killing intent seemed to have turned into a physical aura that charged into the enemy camp. For some reason, including Akmu, many of the Mongolian cavalry could not help but feel a chill run down their spines. This was the manifestation of the killing intent turning into a physical form. It was like a butcher. After killing so many pigs, even if they were alive, they could not help but shiver. The charge of the Mongolian cavalry did not stop because of this. They were like how they dealt with the small Russian tribes, spreading out and trying to use the wolfpack tactic to split up and win. Although they felt a chill in their bones when they charged, since they chose to charge, they would not stop for no reason. Arrow formation. Tianhu, who was charging at the front, had no intention of stopping either. This was not the first time they had faced a pack of wolves, so they used the short arrow formation to charge forward as if they were familiar with it. Countless facts had proven that the Mongolian cavalry were not scary. They just needed to maintain their hearts and charge according to what they had learned in their training. Chapter 1383. This was one of the important instructions Yang Qindong gave to the army. When they faced a strong enemy, they were not to be easily moved by them. They would fight their own battles and they would fight their own battles. They were not to change because of the enemy. If that happened, they would be giving up on their advantage and letting the enemy take advantage of them. In truth, this was often the treasure that decided the outcome of a battle between powerful players. When a weak player ran into a strong player, their rhythm would usually be messed up. In fact, to protect their lives, they would have no choice but to adapt to the enemy's fighting style. In the end, they would only have the strength to fight back and would not be able to attack at all. How could they not lose? On the other hand, if they fought in the style they were most familiar with, even though there was a high chance that they would lose, they could at least threaten the enemy. If they were lucky, it was not impossible for them to heavily injure the enemy and turn defeat into victory. As the strongest army among cold weapons and the world's best cavalier army that had just been expanded into an army, Commander Tian Hu would often use Yang Qindong's words to teach his soldiers. Along with the fact that they were stronger than the enemy to begin with and the morale they gained after winning, the moment both sides clashed, Akmu was shocked to find that he was about to lose. In terms of strength, the five-star army waited patiently, and the Mongolian cavaliers who were attacking could not compare to them. In terms of weapons, the soldiers of the world's best cavalier army were all equipped with divine sabers, and their advantage was clear. As long as the enemy dared to fight against them head-on, they would be cut in half after 3 slashes, and they would not be able to continue fighting. In terms of morale, the Mongolian cavaliers had just suffered a great defeat, and all the soldiers were like birds that were startled by the twang of a bow. On the other hand, the five-star army had just obtained a great victory, and everyone's confidence was high. This made them even more decisive when they attacked, and the gap between them and the enemy increased by a large margin. When comparing them, the difference in strength was obvious. It could be said that before the battle even started, the victor had already been decided. A tiger had entered a pack of wolves, and it was not just one tiger, but a tiger that had more people than a pack of wolves. The pressure it brought to the Mongolian cavaliers could be easily seen. After fighting for around 15 minutes, Akmu was shocked to find that he could not even use half of the strength he had before. The number of casualties continued to increase, especially as the number of times they clashed increased. Many of the sabers in the Mongolian cavaliers' hands were cut in half, and they were at a disadvantage in terms of weapons. The speed at which they lost became even faster. Protect the general and open up a bloody path. Around a dozen of his remaining personal guards protected Akim. When they saw that the Mongolian cavaliers were about to leave, these personal guards shouted in unison and gathered together to charge out of the corner surrounded by the five-star army. "Let me do it." A warhorse suddenly rushed out from Yang Qindong's side. Needless to say, that tall figure and that deafening voice belonged to none other than Beta Persei. Speaking of which, Beta Persei also had the courage of 1,000 men. He had been by Yang Qindong's side for many years and could receive pointers at any time. When it came to individual combat power, even in the five-star army, there were few who could match him. Usually he had to protect the safety of the 6th young master, so he did not have many chances to go to the battlefield. Now that the situation was set, he was itching to fight. When he saw that there were a dozen enemy cavaliers who wanted to escape, he did not hold back and immediately rode his horse away. The dozen Mongolian cavaliers were unusually fierce as they protected Akim and destroyed the path that the five-star army had blocked. They formed a large force and charged out of the battlefield. To be able to become Akim's personal guards, their skills were naturally not bad. Although they did not create the 18 shadow guards or the 12 protectors, they were all strong men who could fight against 10 or even dozens of people. If they gathered their strength together, normal five-star army soldiers would not be able to block them. This could be seen from the fact that they had only lost 4 people even though they had injured more than a dozen five-star army cavaliers along the way. And just when they had already charged through a few blockade lines and were about to break out of the encirclement and escape, a war horse and a tall figure blocked their path. Without any warning, the person rushed in front of them and raised his saber to slash down. Waves of great force crashed into the sabers of the Mongolian personal guards, and a great pressure came from their arms. Cling cling clang 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 clang, it was as if he had entered a realm where no one could stop him. Block block chop lift sweep press. All sorts of attacks were displayed by Yang Heir on horseback. His movements were quick and steady, and he suppressed the Mongolian cavaliers who seemed to be unstoppable a moment ago to the point that they were forced to retreat. Fall. The saber slashed down fiercely and hit the chest of a Mongolian cavalier. The great force caused the cavalier's saber to break, and the blade was also wedged into the cavalier's sternum. The cavalier fell off his horse. "Get down from your horses." Once the saber was pulled out from the chest of a Mongolian cavalier, it was raised and flicked, and it hit another Mongolian cavalier who was charging at him. After the saber sliced through the cavalier's arm, another Mongolian cavalier cried out in pain and fell off his horse. Get down all of you." The man and horse quickly weaved through the Mongolian cavaliers. His saber was like a nimble snake, and the Mongolian cavaliers around him were either cut down, flicked, or pressed down from their horses. No one was able to withstand a single blow from him. Sixth young master, second brother's strength has increased again. When the captain of the first team, Chiu Vi, saw this scene, he could not help but sigh in amazement. At the same time, he was eager to give it a try. Even though he could not compare to Beta Persei's position in Yang Qindong's eyes, because he was close to him, he had received a lot of pointers. He really wanted to go up and see how strong he was. Beta Persei is a person who is willing to work hard. Let's see, these people might not be enough for him to kill alone. Yang Qindong's gaze was like a torch, and he spoke with the gaze of a grandmaster. As the saying went, once an expert made a move, the truth would be revealed. Even though Beta Persei's strength was much weaker than his, normal Mongolian cavaliers could no longer stop him. Since Yang Qindong had said this, Chiu Vi could only suppress the thought of going up to help Beta Persei. Then he stared at the battlefield with his eyes wide open. He wanted to learn how Beta Persei fought. Many times, watching a battle between experts was also an experience of enlightenment, and it was also a rare opportunity. In the battlefield, Beta Persei killed more than 10 Mongolian cavaliers in a short period of time, and finally faced off against General Akhmu. As the great general of Siberia, Khan Hurahin, Akhmu did not rely on flattery to get to his position. He was a person with real instincts. Before he met the 5-star army. No. It should be said that before he fell into the trap tonight, Akhmu was very arrogant. In his eyes, the Han people were as weak as sheep. They were not even as weak as the Russians who dared to resist them from time to time. Since the 5-star army was mainly made up of Han people, there was no such thing as being strong or powerful. As long as he arrived with the army, one charge would be enough to scare the opponent. Then, it would be the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves, and the pursuit of the enemy would be a great victory. It was precisely because he thought that everything was too simple and too easy. When he found out that he was surrounded, Akhmu was shocked. He finally knew that the Han people he faced this time were different from the Han people in the past. They had some ability. However, this ability was nothing more than relying on schemes and trickery to win. If it was face to face, blade to blade, he was confident that he would be able to beat the crap out of these Han people. As a result, there was the scene of him leading the army to counterattack. Then the confidence in his heart was thrown away one by one. What did they mean that he accidentally fell into a trap? What did they mean that the Han people were weak and easy to bully? Right now, Akhmu only wanted to kill all those who had spread the news. If the Han people were easy to bully, then who was the one who beat him up? After failing time and time again, breaking through the bottom line of his heart, Akhmu no longer had the heart to fight against the 5-star army. This was because he found that even if there were no schemes or traps, he would not be able to gain any advantage against the 5-star army. The only difference was that the other party would have to pay a higher price. However, the result of the battle could not be changed. He would definitely lose and the Han people would win. If he could escape this time, Akhmu would definitely tell Great Khan Hulahin to retreat as far away as possible from the 5-star army. The Han people were simply devils, executioners who killed without batting an eyelid. On the contrary, they were like clowns who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. They were so ignorant, so arrogant, and so reckless. However, it was clearly too late for him to think of all this at this time. At this time, Akhmu was already a little scared. If it was possible, if he was not a great general, perhaps he would choose to surrender in order to survive. However, at this time he had no other choice. With the trust and support that Hulahin had given him over the years, even if he had to fight to the death, he would not say a word about surrendering. Yang Heir's chest heaved up and down as he went on a killing spree. After all, he had killed and injured more than a dozen people, so his physical strength was somewhat depleted. Even so, when facing Akhmu, he was still full of pride and said, "Seeing that you are still a general, I will give you a chance. If you don't want to die, surrender." Different from the cloth armor that the other Mongolian cavalry wore, Akhmu wore metal armor. Moreover, it was not the half-metal armor that normal soldiers wore. Instead, it was a full metal armor that protected his body. Just based on this, his identity should not be simple. Beta Persei wanted to capture this person alive. It would be a great achievement. Looking at Beta Persei, Akhmu quickly shook his head. "You are very strong, but this general will never surrender. My soul has long returned to Tingri. Even if you kill me now, it will not be long before I will be a hero again." "Tingri my ass," Beta Persei muttered. He had long known from Yang Qindong that the so-called Tingri was like the god that the Han people talked about. It was a kind of belief and a kind of spiritual support. It did not exist at all. Of course, he also knew that many Mongolians respected Tingri. If anyone said anything bad about them, they would immediately become the public enemy. He would not do such a stupid thing. Chapter 1384. Beta Persei's eyes became brighter as he cursed Akmu's ignorance in his heart. Since he won't surrender, then I'll just kill him. I hope he's not too weak so I can fight to my heart's content. Slowly raising his sword and arm, Beta Persei assumed a posture of a life-and-death battle. Similarly, Akmu also raised his saber and raised it high up in the air. When their eyes met, the word kill came out of their mouths almost at the same time. Then the warhorses under both sides let out a neigh, and the two men quickly approached each other. One was the great general of the Siberian Mongol cavalry. He held a high position, was unusually brave, and had experienced hundreds of battles. The other was the leader of the five-star army. He was a close subordinate of Yang Xie's leader, Yang Qindong. He had extraordinary strength and the power of his sword was mighty. The so-called strongest of the strongest referred to them. In the process of rushing, when the warhorses crossed, the two sabers quickly collided and separated in an instant. In the first round they were evenly matched and it looked like they were evenly matched. After galloping for a distance, the two men turned their horses around and stared at each other. After the exchange, the two men didn't seem any different from before. But if one looked carefully they could still see the differences. For example, Beta Persei's indifferent face, the tension in Akmu's eyes, and his slightly trembling right arm. With the advantage of the weapon, Yang Er, who was holding the heavenly saber, could release all of his strength to the maximum when fighting. He didn't have to worry about the weapon breaking down. In contrast, Akmu couldn't do the same. After seeing the scene of many soldiers' weapons being broken, he was afraid of the five-star army's sabers. This made him not dare to use all his strength in the fight because he wasn't sure if the saber in his hand was strong enough to break in two. The fear in his heart and the inability to use all his strength weakened his momentum and confidence by at least 30%. In a battle between experts, a small mistake could be fatal. Who would dare to not use their full strength? It could be said that with the advantage of the toughness of the weapon, Beta Persei had already gained the upper hand before the battle even began. The tremendous force behind the blow had already caused Akmu's arm to feel sore and numb, showing signs of defeat. Haha, you and I had a fair fight. How delightful. Again. Beta Persei laughed heartily as he felt the exhilaration of releasing his power. After a loud shout, he urged his horse forward. Fair my ass. Akmu cursed in his heart. Due to the disadvantage of his weapon, he didn't dare to use his full strength. Naturally, he couldn't display his full strength. Now that he saw Beta Persei rushing over again, he had no choice but to bite the bullet and charge forward. Ding ding dang dang dang. After another clash, Beta Persei laughed again and launched another charge, forcing Akmu to passively attack again and again. In just a short while, the two sides had clashed for at least 10 rounds. Finally, the saber in Akmu's hand broke into two. Although the quality of the weapon in his hand was extraordinary as a supreme general, there was still a huge gap between his weapon and Yang Xie's more mature forging skills. It was already very difficult for him to hold on until now. Not only that, because he didn't dare to use his full strength, Akmu had been enduring the tremendous force from Beta Persei on his wrist. At this time, his right arm had become red and swollen, and it was difficult for him to even lift the saber. Hey, why did your saber break by itself? Are you afraid of your grandfather? Well, if that's the case, why don't you surrender? You seem to have some ability. If you surrender, your grandfather will spare your life. How about it? Beta Persei seemed to have just noticed the other party's broken saber and said jokingly. Akmu's face was flushed red. He was furious and infuriated. After so many years of fighting, this was the first time he heard that a saber could be afraid of people. Knowing that Beta Persei was humiliating him, Akmu glared at him and said, "If you want to fight, then fight. You're a vile person with a sharp tongue. You're courting death." Seeing that Akmu still had no intention of surrendering, Beta Persei was also enraged. After a roar, he urged his horse to charge again. This time he wouldn't hold back and vowed to cut down his opponent. Beta Persei wasn't worried about whether or not he could kill Akmu. Since the young master didn't say anything to stop him, it wouldn't be a problem to kill this person. Since that was the case, he didn't have any worries and just focused on fighting with all his might. Akmu held half of the saber in his hand and his expression was ugly. But he didn't have the slightest intention of surrendering. A general had died in 100 battles. Since he had won the war, he had to be prepared to die. He only hated himself for being careless this time. Not only did he not have long to live, but he also implicated nearly 10,000 soldiers to die here. In the end, he still failed to live up to the Khan's trust. Akmu, who already had the intention to die, didn't have any more worries. The worst outcome was nothing more than death. How could a person who wasn't even afraid of death be afraid of Beta Persei's saber? Akmu, who was holding half of the saber in his hand, charged forward without any intention of dodging. He launched the last attack of his life. Beta Persei finally felt that something was wrong. As the distance between the two sides got closer and closer, the other party didn't have the slightest intention of dodging. There was only an indomitable momentum and an attitude of mutual destruction. Beta Persei, who didn't want to die with Akmu, had no choice but to change the direction of his saber midway. The saber also changed from a slash to a sweep and fiercely slapped Akmu's body. The powerful saber slapped Akmu's chest and he immediately spat out a mouthful of blood. Even a tree branch could exert a great amount of power, let alone a saber. Blood gushed out of Akmu's mouth as he was struck. Akmu forcefully gathered his strength and swept his saber across Yang Second's black armor, leaving a mark on it. But it was only a shallow mark. The attack range of the broken saber was limited, which allowed Beta Persei to escape. After noticing the saber mark on the armor, Beta Persei first took a deep breath. He didn't dare to imagine what the result would be if the other party didn't use a broken saber, but a whole saber. In other words, he was almost injured by the other party. If he wanted to kill his own people, he had to kill them first. Beta Persei would not allow a defeated general to threaten him. After shouting angrily, he raised his saber and slashed back. This slash used almost 90% of his strength. Akmu, who had just swung his saber and used up all his strength, had a regretful expression on his face. He was so close to beheading the general of the 5-star army. Just as he was feeling regretful, he felt a cold wind coming from above his head. When he raised his head again, a sharp saber was falling towards his head. It was already dark. Although there were torches around, it was still difficult to see. Akmu only saw the shadow of a saber flash above his head, and then an indescribable pain attacked his whole body. After struggling for a while, Akmu's chest suddenly split open and blood gushed out. Then he lowered his head and saw that his body had been split in half. Akmu's nose twitched as he could no longer breathe in oxygen. His body trembled a few times before he fell off the horse and onto the ground, forever losing his consciousness and senses. Who? Beta Persei, who had killed Akmu, let out a long sigh. Reality told him that if he underestimated any opponent, he would have to pay a heavy price. If it wasn't for the fact that the other party was holding a broken blade, the one who would be lying on the ground right now would be him. With Akmu killed, the other Mongol soldiers who were lucky enough to survive were either killed or surrendered. Before the sun rose, the battle had already ended. Of the 8,000 Mongol cavalry that charged into the ambush, not a single one managed to escape. The battle on the main battlefield had already ended. Outside the Amuga River, the battle was still ongoing. When the 2,000 Mongol cavalry saw that the main force of the army had fallen into the 5-star army's trap, they turned around and fled. The previous scene had already told them that tonight's ambush had failed. It was not difficult for the 8,000 Mongol cavalry to not be able to escape. Since they had already lost, it was impossible for them to turn the situation around with just 2,000 people. Rather than continuing to die, they might as well escape and report this matter to the Khan. The 2,000 Mongol cavalry retreated. However, before they could run 5 miles, Nanlidi brought a Hechi who had come to report, and a group of cavalry to welcome them. While they were still far away, Nanlidi's voice rang out first. "Are the people in front our brothers? We are here to support you." Before the battle had even started, a Hechi had been released by Akmu so that he could find Nanlidi and ask him to send troops together. He had purposely notified them a little later so that Akmu would not steal the credit from him. However, what he did not expect was that what awaited him was not credit but death. Of course, even if Akmu had notified Nanlidi in advance, he would have found all sorts of reasons to delay. The one in control of the army was not him, but Ba Dao Jiang and the 1st Division Commander Taimur. They led 4,000 troops and waited here for the chance to deal the final blow to the Mongol cavalry. When the flames in the camp soared into the sky, the 4,000 cavalry finally moved. They galloped all the way and killed any fish that fell into the net. The 2,000 Mongol cavalry that had escaped were unfortunately stopped by them. After losing contact with their commander, the 2,000 Mongol cavalry were defeated by a wave of 5-star army. The cavalry fled in all directions and rushed into the surrounding forest. With Tianyi and Lin Duo, Even 40,000 cavalrymen would not be able to surround the entire area, let alone 4,000 cavalrymen. Ba Daojiang and Teimu could only watch as the scattered Mongolian soldiers escaped. They focused their attention on the main force of the Mongolian cavalry. Compared to the main battlefield, the battle on this side of the battlefield had already ended a step earlier. The final tally was that they had captured and killed around 1,600 cavalry. This meant that at least 400 Mongol cavalry had escaped during the night. When they reported this to Yang Qindong, he was not surprised. He only said, "The army should use the time to clean up the battlefield and rest. Tomorrow afternoon we will set off for Arching." Since they had already revealed their tracks and displayed their strength, in order to prevent Hurahan from escaping with the army, they had to speed up their march. Even so, Yang Qindong did not have the confidence to kill all the enemies. This was caused by the environment. The Far East region was filled with forests, lakes, and mountains. If someone wanted to hide in such an area, finding them would be as difficult as finding a needle in a haystack. Chapter 1385. Arching City. 3 days later, when Khagan Hulahan was still waiting for good news from General Akmu, an unexpected piece of news was delivered to him. When the cavalry who had escaped from the front lines knelt down in front of him and described the situation at the front lines, Hulahan felt the sky darken and he almost fainted. Akmu had actually been defeated. Not only that, but his own life and death were unknown. Of the 10,000 Mongolian cavalry under him, less than 400 had returned. This result was completely out of Hulahan's expectations. Since the 5-star army only had 10,000 people, even if they could not win, they should be able to retreat safely. They were the Mongolian cavalry, a race that had grown up on horseback. Compared to the Hans who were not good at riding, they had a natural advantage. In fact, many times on the battlefield they looked down on their Hans opponents. Hulahan fainted. His subordinates tried to save him, pinching his philtrum and splashing cold water on him, before finally waking him up. After waking up, Hulahan first accepted the fact that they had lost, but he still did not believe that Akmu would be fine. He was very clear about Akmu's abilities, and ordinary people would not be able to catch him. Furthermore, he had a large army, so he believed that he would definitely be able to break out of the encirclement. Just as Hulahan regained his composure, Belinsky walked in from outside the door. He first bowed to Hulahan and then asked with concern, "I heard that the Great Khan is not feeling well. I have already found the best doctor in the city. They are waiting outside the residence and can examine the Great Khan at any time." "No need, this Khan's body is very good." Hulahan waved his hand. He did not trust the Han's doctors, not to mention that he was not sick. He had only fainted because he was too anxious. However, no matter what, Belinsky had good intentions. This time they were able to take down Arching City because of him. A look of hesitation flashed across Hulahan's face, but he quickly said with determination, "Let me tell you something. General Akmu fell into the Han's trap and lost the battle." What? Belinsky's expression changed when he heard this. He was indeed unaware of this news. After all, news of Akmu's death had only just reached the city. This news caused Belinsky's expression to change drastically. At the same time he asked suspiciously, "Great Khan, is this true? Was this news personally sent by General Akmu? But where is the general now?" "The news didn't come from Akmu. It came from the cavalry he brought with him. Don't worry, this news is reliable. The battle is definitely won. As for Akmu's whereabouts, even I don't know." While shaking his head, Hulahan angrily slammed the table and said, "The 5-star army has gone too far. They actually dared to set a trap for me. They are truly despicable. This enmity must be avenged." Hulahan did have a reason to be angry. No one would be in a good mood after being taught a lesson by someone they had always looked down on. But why didn't he think about it? If he hadn't targeted the Far Eastern Army first, how could the 5-star army find trouble with them so quickly? Hulahan was still sulking. Belinsky indeed wouldn't. Although he was a merchant, it was because of this that he placed benefits and safety more than anyone else. The Mongol cavalry was known as a race on horseback. They had always been the ones to kill. When had they ever been killed or lost a battle? At the very least, from what he knew, when the Russian tribes faced the Mongol cavalry, they had mostly lost. The 5-star army was actually so powerful that they could defeat the elite Mongol cavalry. Didn't that mean they were even more powerful? He had actually offended such a powerful person. Didn't that mean he was no longer safe? No, I have to leave. I have to leave the 5-star army. In this chaotic world, Belinsky, who had always viewed his life as the most important, quickly made a decision. In order to leave this place safely, he had to ask Hulahin to bring him along. Otherwise, whether it was in the Far East or in the Siberian region, he would not have a foothold in the future. Belinsky, who had made up his mind, looked at Hulahin and organized his words before saying, "Great Khan, the 5-star army is so powerful. We shouldn't fight them head-on." Ichem? What? Do you really think this Khan is afraid of them? This time they only defeated Akmu because they schemed. Even if they can win, they must have suffered heavy losses. Now this Khan still has more than 15,000 elite cavalry. This Khan is still confident that we can defeat them. Hulahin wouldn't admit defeat so easily. Although his bloodline wasn't pure and he couldn't be considered a member of the Golden family, he was still a descendant of Genghis Khan. He was still very proud in his bones. Seeing that Hulahin was still so stubborn, Belinsky scolded him for being stupid in his heart. On the surface, he had to put on a serious expression and said, "The Great Khan's might is naturally not something that the Han people can match. However, the problem now is that not only do we have the 5-star army as our enemy, we also have the Far Eastern army behind us. Previously we were unprepared and caught them off guard, so they had no choice but to hide. However, now that their reinforcements are here, they will definitely jump out and become enemies with the Great Khan. When that time comes, the Great Khan won't have any advantage in terms of military strength. Even if we can win in the end, the Great Khan's strength will also be heavily injured. In that case, if other forces enter this place, what will we use to defend against them?" This. Hulahin wanted to say that as long as he was here, they wouldn't be defeated by the 5-star army. However, after considering that if they really won an Pyrrhic victory, once their strength was severely damaged, it was inevitable that there would be despicable people who would target them. There were no laws here, nor was there any so-called justice. Everything was based on the law of the jungle where the strong preyed on the weak. If they didn't have enough strength, then they deserved to be bullied. Hulahin wouldn't watch his strength be damaged and be looked down upon by others. If that was the case, what was the use of occupying Arching? Thinking of this, his thoughts of fighting to the death with the 5-star army couldn't help but waver. Seeing that Hulahin didn't say anything, Belinsky knew that his suggestion was effective. He immediately followed up, "Great Khan, the Han people have a saying, where there is life there is hope. As long as the Great Khan is still here, this one is still here. If you and I work together, I will provide the money and you will provide the manpower. The Han people also have a saying, it's never too late for a gentleman to take revenge. Today the 5-star army made us suffer. Let's remember this first. We will get our revenge sooner or later." As Belinsky consoled him, he also repeated his own importance. In the end, he was telling Hulahin that he was very important and that he had to bring him along when he left. Hulahin, who didn't think too much, didn't know what Belinsky was thinking. He was only considering whether Belinsky's words were correct. Just like how Belinsky valued his own life, Belinsky naturally didn't want to die. Not only that, he also valued his own strength. Since he was young, he had seen too many unfair things. He also respected the truth, which was that the one with the biggest fist was the absolute truth. As long as you had enough strength, you could set the rules. On the other hand, if you were weak, even if what you said was correct, no one would listen to you. He thought about how he wasn't the only armed force in Siberia, and he wasn't even the only Great Khan. If his strength was weakened too much, he was afraid that he wouldn't even have a place to stay when he returned this time. Since he wasn't confident that he could win, and there wouldn't be enough benefits even if he won, why would he fight this battle? Instead of taking the risk, it was better to retreat first. Just like what Belinsky said, he should preserve his strength first. Revenge could wait until he was stronger, right? Okay. After thinking it through, Hulahin slapped his thigh and said, "You're right, we don't have to fight to the death with the 5-star army. Since that's the case, why don't we retreat first? How about this? This Khan will immediately order the army to prepare to leave. When the time comes, we won't leave anything behind for the 5-star army. This Khan wants to leave them a mess and give them a headache." Belinsky heaved a sigh of relief when Hulahin finally thought it through. However, when he heard that Hulahin wanted to openly retreat, he stopped him and said, "Great Khan, you can't do that. If we leave now, we will definitely leak the news. What if the 5-star army and the Far Eastern army join forces and chase after us? What do you think we should do?" Arhan didn't think about this problem and was a bit stunned when he was asked this. If we leave, then we leave. In the past, when we retreated from a place, it was always like this. With a big order, the army would move out and grab everything that they could see and use. Why did they have to do something so complicated this time? Arhan was confused, so Belinsky knew that he had to explain some things to him. "Great Khan, the current situation is like this. We just lost to the 5-star army. Once the news leaks out, the morale of the army will definitely fall. If the hidden Far Eastern army also knows about this, they will take advantage of the situation and come out. What can we do? If they join forces with the 5-star army and attack us from two sides, even if we can leave, we will have to pay a price. Even if we leave, we can only leave quietly. Before we leave, we can also remove some unstable factors in the army. Unstable factors. Houlihan didn't understand what the other party was talking about. Chapter 1386. Bilinci sighed in his heart. This Houlihan might be good at fighting and killing, but when it came to scheming and plotting, he was a far cry from that. It was probably because there was no one else in the Mongolian army that he was able to get the position. Great Khan Tang Xing is a surrendered general, but he has not truly joined us. Before, it was only because we captured his tribesmen and forced him to join us. Now that he's with his clansmen, no one knows if he'll really listen to us. People like him are unstable elements in the army. Since that's the case, why don't we leave him here and let him lead the troops to deal with the Far Eastern army? Isn't that killing two birds with one stone? After he leaves, our army will leave the city. At that time, it will be the Han people's problem. If they want to kill each other, we can just kill them. There will be no losses for us. What do you think, Great Khan? After finally speaking his thoughts, Bilinski looked into Houlihan's eyes with anticipation. Ichim? Chim. That makes sense. Houlihan took a while to digest these words, then nodded his head heavily. He was a selfish person and would not easily trust others. In his eyes, the remaining 15,000 Mongol cavalry were the most loyal. Even Bilinski could be abandoned at any time, let alone Tang Xing. If it was not for the fact that Tang Xing still held the authority of the 2nd Cavalry Division, he would not even look at him. Now that he could leave safely by abandoning Tang Xing, it was definitely worth it. He nodded and said, "That's fine. I'll leave this matter to you. The sooner the better." Yes. Bilinski nodded heavily. Although he was not willing to do such a thing, if he left it to Houlihan, it could easily cause problems. For his own safety and the safety of his assets, he had to do it personally. After leaving the Great Khan's residence, Bilinski went straight to Tang Xing's residence. Ever since his clansmen had been found and sent to All City, Tang Xing had arranged for them to stay in his courtyard. Along with some of his personal guards, although the courtyard was not big, there were quite a few people. There were close to 500 people. When Bilinski arrived, he felt that it was very lively. When Bilinski arrived, Tang Xing, who had received the news, immediately came to welcome him. The two of them went to the study and asked everyone to leave. When Tang Xing saw Bilinski's cautious expression, he had a bad feeling. Until the other party spoke, he knew that his premonition was not wrong. "General Tang, a great disaster is about to befall you," Bilinski said with a long sigh, as if he was very concerned about Tang Xing. "Why?" Tang Xing was so shocked that he stood up from his chair with a look of horror on his face. Ever since he rebelled against the Far Eastern army, Tang Xing hadn't had a good night's sleep. As a traitor, especially before his old master was killed, he needed to be on guard against revenge and all kinds of methods that could be used against him. Especially in the past few days, the entire All City had been in chaos. The people living here, whether it was their personal safety or their property, were greatly threatened. Facing the Mongol cavalry who only knew how to plunder and didn't know how to manage and produce, the people were already complaining and dissatisfied. Sometimes, even he would feel angry when he saw the Mongol cavalry's actions. They were simply a group of bandits who didn't talk reason and only did things based on their emotions. They didn't care about the people's feelings at all. However, because they had cavalry swords in their hands that could kill, the people didn't dare to say anything. Because of this, many people vented their anger on him. Even though he also held a certain amount of military power, the people weren't bold enough to attack his residence, and no one dared to truly make a move against him. However, when he walked on the streets, he could still feel the unconcealed anger of the people when they looked at him with gazes. He had offended the Far Eastern army, offended the people in the city, and the 5-star army had sent reinforcements. It would be strange if Tang Xing was in a good mood. As a result, there were many times when he began to doubt whether his actions back then were right or wrong. For the sake of his less than 200 clansmen, he had betrayed the interests of tens of thousands of Far East soldiers and hundreds of thousands of people. Did he do something wrong? While he was reflecting on himself, Tang Xing was also very afraid of death. He was afraid that some people who couldn't touch the Mongol cavalry would target him. Therefore, when he went out, he doubled the number of guards. Even when he slept at home, he arranged many guards outside to protect him. However, even so, he was still unable to sleep until dawn. Often, the slightest movement would wake him up. Now that Belinsky had come and said that he was in trouble, how could he not be afraid? Mr. Tang, what's going on? Back then, I listened to you and rebelled against the Far Eastern Army. Now you can't leave me alone. Tang Xing suddenly grabbed Belinsky's arm and said with a pleading expression. Don't be agitated, don't be agitated. Belinsky was in a good mood. Originally, he thought that it would take some effort to scare Tang Xing. But now, it seemed that he was simply a bird that was startled by the twang of a bow, so the following things would be much easier. After patting Tang Xing's arm and making a comforting gesture, Belinsky frowned. After thinking for a while, he said to Tang Xing, who was listening seriously, General Tang, I'm sure you can tell that the Khan is a suspicious person. He doesn't really trust you, right? Yes. Tang Xing nodded. Half of his blood was Han Chinese. Just based on this, it would be extremely difficult to make Hulahan trust him. Yes, the Khan is somewhat suspicious of you. Previously, someone went to the Khan and complained to him, saying that you only surrendered to the Khan on the surface, but secretly had other thoughts and that you were still in contact with the Far Eastern Army. No, absolutely not. Tang Xing, who had just sat down, suddenly stood up again with a thump. His face was red. This time he was really anxious. The feeling of being wronged was not good. He would never admit to something he did not do. Don't worry, your subordinate will speak, your subordinate will speak. Belinsky comforted him again, then said, I absolutely trust the general. You have already stabbed the Far Eastern Army. How could you still be in contact with them? I also went to the Khan about this matter and told him that you are innocent. Thank you, thank you. Tang Xing wiped the sweat on his forehead and said gratefully, Don't thank me. In fact, this matter is not over. I only temporarily dispelled the Khan's suspicion of you. If you want the Khan to completely believe you, you still need to do something. Belinsky began to lead the topic to the trap. Sure enough, when he heard that there was a solution, Tang Xing asked with a face full of curiosity, Please teach me, Mr. Tang. I can't say that I'll teach you, but if the general can lead the troops to deal with the Far Eastern Army, wouldn't that be the best way to prove yourself? At that time, once you can capture the Far Eastern Army's commander, or even severely injure the Far Eastern Army, who would dare to doubt you? At that time, not only will the Khan completely trust you, it is also possible that he will give you great power. When he heard that he had to become enemies with the Far Eastern Army, Tang Xing's face immediately turned ugly. When Belinsky instigated him to rebel, he said that it would be best if he could capture Qinbo. If he couldn't, he only needed to open the gates of Arqing. In the future, he wouldn't need to do anything to deal with the Far Eastern Army. But now it was a different story. Tang Xing wanted to remind the other party of the promise he made to him. But after thinking about it, what was the point of saying it? Right now, Hulahan didn't trust him. If he didn't quickly solve this problem, who knew when the Mongolian cavalry would visit his home? If that happened, would he and his clansmen still have a way to live? There was no choice. It wasn't a matter of whether he was willing or not, but he had to do it. Otherwise, a disaster would be right in front of him. Phew. Tang Xing exhaled. His face didn't look good, but there were still some things that needed to be said and some promises that needed to be made. Mr. Tang, since doing this can eliminate the Khan's suspicion of me, I will lead the troops to deal with the Far Eastern Army. Belinsky was very happy that Tang Xing agreed so easily. But in order to make sure that the other party didn't do nothing, he continued to promise, That's good. If that's the case, no one will be able to slander the general. That's right, the general only needs to lead the troops. I will ask the Khan to send troops to help you. When the time comes, we will deal with the Far Eastern Army and have done a great service. I hope the general won't forget my contribution. Of course, of course. Tang Xing was relieved when he heard that the Mongolian cavalry would help him. He had hidden many spies in the Far Eastern Army. Those people were like him, not pure Han people. They wouldn't be loyal to the Far Eastern Army. With these spies and the help of the 2nd Cavalry Division and the Mongolian soldiers, it wouldn't be difficult to deal with the Far Eastern Army that had already been discovered. Tang Xing agreed and personally sent Belinsky out of the residence with a look of gratitude. At the same time, he promised that he would gather the troops now and leave the city tomorrow morning to find the Far Eastern Army. Good news would come soon. Tang Xing didn't know that he had been completely used by Belinsky and abandoned by Hulahan. He had become an abandoned pawn and had to cover for the Mongolian army's departure. It could be said that he had made the best use of everything. Chapter 1387. Belinsky happily went to see Hulahan. First he explained Tang Xing's attitude. Then he suggested that the moment Tang Xing left the city the next day, they would seal the city and loot the entire city. They would take everything that could be used or taken away and quickly leave this place. They would return to Siberia to recuperate and prepare for the next battle. Houlihan happily accepted Belinsky's suggestion. However, at the same time he was also alarmed. This merchant was too cunning, so much so that he had to be wary. He even wondered if he could kill this merchant if he had the chance. When the time came, he would be able to obtain the merchant's wealth and avoid a huge danger. Wouldn't that be the best of both worlds? Unfortunately, Belinsky did not know this. He was still fantasizing about how he could expand his caravan in Siberia with Houlihan's support. He even thought that without Akmu, Houlihan would be in urgent need of talents. He should have the ability to take over this position. This was the difference between a merchant and a ruthless person. Merchants thought more about benefits and how to make use of each other in a win-win situation. Ruthless people were different. They mostly did things based on their hearts. Once they realized that there was danger, they would kill without any reason. As for the consequences, that was something to be discussed in the future. As for Tang Xing, after receiving Belinsky's reminder, he began to gather his troops that afternoon. After bringing enough rations for 5 days, he bade farewell to his clansmen early the next morning and led his troops out of Arching. Not long after he left the city gates were closed. At the same time they began to loot. In order not to attract attention, there was no fire in the city. Everything that could be looted was looted, and those that could not be taken away were smashed. For a time the city was in a mess. Even General Tang Xing's residence did not escape. Belinsky personally led the army to charge in, and then there was a round of looting. Tang Xing was a division commander. When he chased Qinbo and the others away, he took a lot of good things. Now they were all in the treasury. Now Belinsky had benefited from them. When they saw the boxes of good things being carried out of the Tang residence, the clansmen who stayed behind to guard the residence could not take it anymore. They all went forward to stop these actions. This made Belinsky unhappy. Since he had decided to go all the way, he gave the order and the Mongol cavalry began to kill. Very quickly, the Tang manor was filled with blood and the stench of blood filled the air. Even after all of the clansmen had died, many of them still had their eyes wide open, as if they had died with a grievance. They really couldn't imagine that the person who came to the residence yesterday and was sent away by Tang Xing with endless gratitude would suddenly reveal killing intent today and kill all of them. What exactly was going on? The chaos in all city also affected the intelligence personnel of the 5-star army in the city. However, because some of them were dressed like beggars and had no money, they did not attract the attention of the Mongolian soldiers. When the situation in the city became more and more chaotic, the intelligence personnel used a new battery that had just been sent into the city to turn on the radio and broadcast the situation outside. At this moment, Yang Qindong was leading his army towards Arching. At this time, the number of troops had reached nearly 20,000. Apart from the 10,000 soldiers, there were also many Mongol captives as well as many Russian clansmen nearby. 3 battles, 3 victories, and Yang Qindong used his actions to prove the strength of the 5-star army. He also attracted the respect of some hot-blooded Russians like Nikolaev. They had even expressed their desire to join the 5-star army. Once they entered Arching, they would be able to achieve their wish. This was Yang Qindong. No matter what the situation was, he could always make the troops grow like a snowball. In the end, they would become a colossus that would strike fear into the bones of all his opponents. As the army was advancing, the intelligence report from Arching was sent over. When the telegram was sent to Yang Qindong, his first thought was that the enemy was about to run. Tell Commander Tianhu to come over immediately. The target had been exposed, so it was time to start a fire. Under the constant cooling, Qinbo fell into a deep sleep once again. This time it was different from the past. Qinbo had really fallen asleep. His breathing was steady, and his body's vital signs were also constantly recovering. It was only a matter of time before his body fully recovered. As for the military matters of the Far Eastern Army, before Qinbo fell asleep, he gave all the power to Commander Daikwa. As the person who followed Yang Qindong to the Far East, Daikwa had seen the strength of the 5-star army. His loyalty to Yang Qindong was not something that the other commanders could compare to. Qinbo was relieved to give the power to this person. After Daikwa obtained the military power, the first thing he did was to take out the tiger talisman that Qinbo gave him. He sent someone to inform the 3rd Cavalry Division and the 5th Cavalry Division. He also allowed Commander Kong He to return to the army and lead the 2nd Cavalry Division to gather at the military headquarters. Even if there are unstable elements in the army, it should only be a small part. It is time to expose them. Commander Dai Ko waved his hand and gave such a military order. There was nothing to be afraid of if there were pustules in the body. What was scary was that they did not dare to squeeze them out. Doing so would only make the problem worse. Since the sixth young master had already arrived with the army, even if these people jumped out, they would not be able to do anything. What was there to be afraid of? Out of his absolute trust in Yang Qindong, Dai Ko let the army assemble without worry. He wanted to see who would jump out and who would court death. At the same time, he also sent a report to Yang Qindong, informing him that the Far Eastern army was not very stable and asking for reinforcements. Yang Qindong had thought a lot about the problem of the Far Eastern army on the way here. Considering that he was entering alone, in order to expand the army, the political review of the source of soldiers was not so strict. As a result, there were all kinds of people mixed in. This was something he could understand. But understanding was not giving in. They ate his food and took his salary, but they wanted to rebel against his master. If he did not punish them well, where would the justice be? He handed over the task of getting rid of the traitors to Beta Persei and allocated 1,000 men from the 2nd Battalion of the Black Cavalry and 2,000 men from the 1st Cavalry Army. He wanted to deal with the unstable elements in the army with a thunderous force. Since he came to the Far East, a fortress like the first city would definitely be built here. After Beta Persei received the order, he quickly left with the army after Tianhu left. Yang Qindong led the rest of the army straight to Arqing. It was already chaotic there. The earlier they arrived, the earlier they could end the chaos there. After Dai Ko received Yang Qindong's reply, he was full of confidence. The stage had been set up, and the next step was to see how those people with bad intentions would act. Tang Xing brought more than 8,000 men from the Far Eastern Army's 4th Cavalry Division to the military forest where Qinbo was. What made people speechless was that this army was still wearing the military uniform of the 5-star army. This was also a helpless move. Although they surrendered to the Mongolian army with their division commander, the other party was too poor. They were so poor that they did not have any uniform at all. They had no choice but to gather here wearing the old military uniform. Wearing the military uniform of the 5-star army, they were now going to fight the 5-star army. The sarcasm was very obvious. The direct experience was that the morale of the soldiers of the 4th Cavalry Division was very low. Most of the soldiers' faces flashed with confusion. Not everyone was as ungrateful as Tang Xing. These soldiers were all from poor families, and many of them were Russian men who had been bullied by the Mongolian cavalry. It was Qinbo who had built Al City after arriving in the Far Eastern region. He gave them food to eat so that they would not starve to death and did not have to worry about their safety. Although Qinbo didn't bring the families of these soldiers to Al City for the sake of the overall stability of the situation, causing them to have a lot of worries in the future. However, their monthly wages were not little and they were never late. With this money they could buy some things in the city to support their own tribes. This was already something that made them feel very proud. Many warriors were still thinking that when the boys in their tribes grew up to be men, they would bring them to Al City to join the army, so that they could better support their tribes. However, they did not expect Tang Xing to betray them. When they received the news, many of the soldiers could not understand, and no one was willing to rebel with him. However, it was at this time that Tang Xing stood up, saying that once they and the Mongolian army took over Al City, they could bring their tribes into the city and live a good life together. It was because of this that the soldiers were appeased, and they had no choice but to stand together with their enemies, the Mongolian cavalry. Tang Xing had indeed kept his promise. After successfully chasing Qinbo out of Al City, he agreed to let the soldiers bring their tribes into the city. However, what no one expected was that the current Arqing was no longer the Arqing of the past. The city had long since fallen under the control of the Mongol army. The series of measures that General Qinbo had set for the citizens had all disappeared, and no one followed them. There were many smashing, killing, robbing and pillaging within the city, and sometimes it was even more chaotic than outside. Under such circumstances, who would bring their own tribes into the city? Wouldn't that be like sending sheep into a tiger's den? It was also at this time that Tang Xing stood up again, saying that the chaos would end soon. As long as the Mongols weren't stupid, Al City would return to peace. Everyone just needed to wait patiently, and Al City would become a true refuge for everyone. In order for this day to come sooner, they needed to eliminate the Far East Army first. They had to get rid of this big problem first. It was under such circumstances that the 4th Cavalry Division left Al City, following Tang Xing to 50 miles north of the city. They acted as if they were going to attack the Far Eastern Army headquarters. Tang Xing, who had just arrived, met up with the Mongol commander Uru, and learned that the Far East army, which had been hidden for many days, was gathering here. Uru welcomed Tang Sheng's arrival very much. There were only 2,000 Mongolian cavalry here. Although they felt that their fighting strength was not bad, the Far Eastern army was said to have tens of thousands of soldiers. In terms of numbers, the difference was still too great. Chapter 1388. Tang Sheng's arrival was not just a matter of increasing the number of soldiers by nearly 10,000. This person was once a division commander of the Far East Army and had many old friends in the army. If this matter was handled well, turning an enemy into a friend, how much help would he gain? General Tang, we will launch the attack tomorrow. When the time comes, both sides will be at the foot of the mountain. I hope that the general can use his glib tongue to gain merit before the battle. At that time, I will truthfully report everything I see to the Khan. Ulu said with a fake smile on his face. He was reminding and also warning Tang Sheng that tomorrow's battle was very important and that he must do his best. Your praise will also be known to the Khan. You must not miss such an opportunity to gain merit. Yes, this general understands. Tang Sheng cupped his fists and said with a very humble attitude. Although the other party was not as good as him in terms of numbers, the other party was a Mongolian general. In comparison, he was far inferior. He had no choice but to flatter the other party. Ulu left the tent, leaving Tang Sheng behind to think about some information about the officers of the Far Eastern Army. If he wanted to persuade those people before the battle, he had to do some homework in advance. This battle would also determine his position in Hulahin's heart. He did not dare to be careless in the slightest. Of course, if he knew that Hulahin had already abandoned him and fled, and that his mansion in All City had long been robbed by the people he trusted, Belinsky, and the people he regarded as his life had also been killed, he probably would not have such thoughts now. At the same time, in the headquarters of the Far Eastern Army in the mountains, Dai Qua also contacted Beta Persei's reinforcements who had arrived at the periphery. When he knew that Beta Persei was already outside the mountains with 4,000 cavalry and could appear at any time, Dai Qua's heart was greatly relieved. He also began to look forward to the arrival of dawn. He wanted to see how many disloyal people there were in the army. He could take advantage of this opportunity to take them all down. The night would eventually pass. On the morning of the second day, both armies began to gather outside their respective tents as if they had discussed it beforehand. Both sides had their own thoughts, but with the same goal, they did not fight to the death right from the start. Instead, they arranged themselves in a formation, looking like they wanted to use their power to suppress the other party. The Mongolian army had over 10,000 cavalry. Adding the 3 divisions of the Far Eastern Army and 20,000 cavalry, they had over 30,000 cavalry. Fortunately, the open space under the mountain forest was not small. But even so, from afar, all kinds of flags fluttered high up in the sky and stood in all directions, giving off a boundless and endless feeling. It took nearly 4 hours, starting from dawn until the sun was high in the sky. Finally, the armies of both sides were in formation. Then it was time for the commanders of each side to take the stage. As for the 5-star army, Qinbo was still recovering, so he did not appear. The one who replaced him was Dai Qua. This was enough to show his authority from the fact that Qinbo's guard captain, Xia Qian, appeared beside him. Other than Dai Qua, the 2nd Division's commander, Kong He, the 3rd Division's commander, Shi Xiaolin, and the 5th Division's commander, Wu Ba, all appeared with their respective cavalry. But what was interesting was that these 3 divisions were not gathered together. They maintained a certain distance between each division, giving off a sense of vigilance. In comparison, the Mongol army only had Tang Xing, Ulu, and a few other generals at the front, and their numbers were much lesser. But the advantage was that they seemed to be united. More importantly, Tang Xing was going to recruit them. This was the most important thing. This was because if this matter was done well, the military strength and morale of both sides would decrease while the other side would increase. It was even possible for there to be a reversal. After both sides were in formation, Tang Xing rode out under General Ulu's signal. In the sudden silence of both camps, this action was too eye-catching no matter how one looked at it. As Tang Xing leaped out of the formation, all kinds of discussions began to spread uncontrollably below. There were very few generals in the Far Eastern Army who did not recognize this 4th Division's commander. Especially this time, the Far Eastern Army had lost Al City, and it was all because of this person. This time it was difficult to not recognize him. He was just a traitor. No one knew what he wanted to do. Could it be that he wanted to repent after seeing the strength of the Far Eastern Army? A few Far Eastern Army soldiers who did not know the truth thought like this. Only some officers who had other thoughts revealed an indescribable expression in their eyes. It was unknown whether they were happy, hesitant, or hesitant. Before Tang Xing spoke, they probably hadn't made a final decision. Commander Dai, the traitor Tang Xing has come out. Please allow this general to kill him. The head of the guards, Xia Qian, glared at Tang Xing and clenched his fists when he saw him gallop out. His eyes were filled with hatred as he spoke. No rush, no rush. Let's wait and see. On the other hand, Dai Kuo was not anxious at all. On the contrary, he was looking forward to the other party's performance. He wanted to see how many loyal generals and villains there were in the Far Eastern Army now. Dai Kuo had no intention of stopping him. Even if the other officers wanted to charge and kill the enemy, they had no choice but to suppress their anger. They wanted to see what this Tang Xing had to say. In the eyes of these brave people, if you did something wrong, you should be punished. Even if Tang Xing said something, they would not easily forgive him. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Tang Xing first swept his gaze over the Far Eastern Army. After recognizing many of his colleagues, he finally opened his mouth slowly. Everyone, I don't think I need to introduce myself. Everyone knows me. Yes, I am the traitor in the eyes of some of you. Just like that, Tang Xing's actions caused another round of discussion to erupt from the two great formations. Everyone was discussing. They had never seen such a shameless person. He actually admitted that he was a traitor. Without waiting for the discussion to continue fermenting, Tang Xing shouted again. But I want to say now, I am not a traitor. I am loyal to my tribe. Half of my blood is Mongol. The reason why I led the Mongol army into Arching was to protect my tribe and continue to reproduce. What's wrong with that? Tang Xing was almost shouting when he asked, "What's wrong?" After saying this, his face became a little ferocious. Is it wrong to think for my tribe? If that's the case, what's the point of being born? If I can't even protect my own family, how can I be a man? How can I be a man? Hearing this, many of the soldiers sucked in a breath of cold air. These words could be said to be heart-wrenching. In ancient times, many soldiers rushed to the battlefield and shouted the slogan to be loyal to the king, to the country. But was this really the case? How many of the so-called loyal people had seen the emperor? How many people had feelings for the so-called country? In the end, soldiers fighting was just a way to make a living. Simply speaking, it was to survive. If there were other purposes, it would be to get promoted and get rich. Therefore, the slogan to be loyal to the king was just a slogan. No one would really think that way. On the contrary, more people did it for the sake of being able to survive in troubled times. There were also some people who were lucky and were promoted from soldiers to officers with some authority. Then their goal would be higher. This was how they filled their own pockets and how they could take advantage of the situation to create more wealth for themselves. In this way, there was the so-called eating empty pay and stealing military supplies. The direct result of this was that the upper echelons of the military wanted to win the war. This was more beneficial to their future promotion and wealth, and even their wives and children. The middle-level officers, especially those young generals who didn't have much room for promotion, thought the opposite. They wanted to win the war. In this way, the matter of them moving public funds would be impossible to investigate, along with the defeat and the death of some people. They could even take advantage of this opportunity to eat more empty pay and get some empty pay. As for the soldiers at the bottom, they were only following orders. If the situation was to their advantage, they would rush up and fight to see if there was a chance to obtain any benefits. On the other hand, once the situation was unfavorable, they would just turn around and run. Staying alive was the most important thing. As for whether or not they won the war, what did it have to do with them? Or rather, there wouldn't be any change in the future. If that was the case, why should they risk their lives? These were some of the true portrayals of the military. Then, could such an army win the war? Without faith, without spiritual support, and without even daring to have hope, could an army expand and unleash their potential? The answer was obviously yes. It was also because of this that Tang Xing didn't feel any shame for his rebellion. On the contrary, he could still speak frankly in front of everyone without a change in expression. This wasn't because he was thick-skinned, but because his thoughts and perspective were different. After Tang Xing shouted out what was wrong, his gaze swept across the Far Eastern Army. Then he began to call out names. Commander Chiwu, as far as I know, your tribe is also outside of All City. Once winter comes, they have to face the pressure of the wind and snow. May I ask, what can you do for them? If you can't, what's the point of being a commander? Vice Commander Jianghu, your situation is the same. Let me ask you, how do you feel at ease? Battalion Commander Li Dei, I heard that 3 of your tribesmen have already frozen to death in the heavy snow this winter. Don't tell me you want to continue with the 4th and 5th? Tang Xing was calling out names. It wasn't targeted at a specific division. It was completely random. He would call out the name of whoever he saw. There were people in a few divisions who were called out. Chapter 1389. All the officers who were called out lowered their heads, proving that Tang Xing was right, proving that they were having a complicated struggle in their hearts. These people were the unstable elements in the Far Eastern Army. They were the internal problems that Commander Qinbo was worried about. After Archeng was taken down, he did not immediately launch a counterattack. Instead, he split up the army and hid them. He was afraid that the problem would be too big. Now, after hearing Tang Xing's words, many people had been bewitched to the point that they were ready to make a move. This was especially so for some of the officers who were called out. When they noticed the changes in the gazes of the people around them, they knew that there was no point in hiding anymore. Thus, they decided to stand out and walk towards the Mongolian camp where Tang Xing was. Some of them did not only bring a single officer, they also brought their brothers and soldiers with them as they walked towards the Mongol cavalry camp. Stop them. Xia Qian saw that the situation was about to turn bad and quickly shouted. At this moment, Kong He and the other 3 division commanders also looked over. They looked at Dai Qua, who was still riding on his horse calmly. Under everyone's gaze, Dai Qua slowly raised his right hand and said calmly, "Don't stop them. Their hearts are no longer with the 5-star army. They can still be of use to us. We have to respect their choice. If there are others who have the same thoughts, you can also walk over." Not only did he not stop them, he even supported them. This made everyone confused. Tang Xing also saw Dai Qua's actions and laughed. He then said, "I didn't expect General Dai Qua to be such a reasonable person. However, I don't know if you have the same thoughts. You can come over as well. Don't worry, with this general here, I will ensure your wealth and glory." Tang Xing was actually persuading Dai Qua to surrender. When Xia Qian heard this, he couldn't help but reach for the scimitar at his waist. He was even prepared to kill Dai Qua if Dai Qua really dared to do that. He would never allow anything to happen to the Far East Army that the commander had single-handedly created. Dai Qua also did not expect such a move. He noticed that there were roughly 3,000 people from the Far Eastern Army who had walked out and joined the Mongol army. Although there were still some people who looked hesitant, they didn't do anything out of line. These people could still be won over, so he thought it was time to stop. While Tang Xing was comforting him, he said, "Glory and wealth." "Ah, Tang Xing, are you joking with me?" Since Dai Qua had responded, Tang Xing was naturally delighted. He was afraid that the other party wouldn't say or do anything. If that happened, he wouldn't know where to start. But once the other party opened his mouth, his opportunity appeared. If there was a problem, there was nothing to be afraid of. All they had to do was solve it. Tang Xing smiled and wanted to ask why there was no glory and wealth. But before he could speak, Dai Qua continued, "The Mongolians are so poor that they don't even have a uniform. The soldiers don't even have spare cavalry swords. They don't even bear to put salt in their food. Tell me, where did the glory and wealth come from?" The Mongolians were really poor. When they didn't know how to produce and couldn't rob others, their lives were actually very poor. The Mongolians that everyone saw killing cows and sheep were the modern Mongolians, not the old Mongolians. In the past, the Mongolians weren't good at producing. They only knew how to herd animals. If they wanted to eat a good meal, they had to wait until something happened to their animals or they died. Those were the animals that they relied on to survive. The males had to be kept and the females had to be prepared to give birth. How could they just casually eat them? It was because they were poor that they had to go around robbing. Dai Qua's question made Tang Xing's expression change. He didn't know how to answer. And this was just the beginning. Through the radio, Dai Qua knew and prepared much more than Tang Xing. He looked at Tang Xing with a contemptuous gaze and said, "The glory and wealth you told everyone about should be just a saying. You're trying to deceive everyone, right? But how wise am I? How could I be so easily fooled like these idiots?" As he spoke, Dai Qua pointed at the men who had just joined the Mongolian army from the Far Eastern Army. Being reprimanded, the traitors, who had a guilty conscience, naturally lowered their heads. There were also some people who looked at Tang Xing. Evidently, they wanted to hear his explanation. They wanted to know if the glory and wealth he had mentioned was real or fake. Seeing these people staring at him, Tang Xing felt his hair stand on end. He quickly waved his hands and explained, "Everyone, don't listen to his nonsense. He's just messing with our morale." "Messing with your morale? Aha, you think too highly of yourself. Do you think you're worthy of talking about morale? You're just a bunch of mobs. You'll go wherever there are benefits. You don't have any principles at all. You don't know what loyalty is. You don't deserve to be human. Dai Quo's voice was very loud as he shouted at Tang Sheng and the soldiers who had just surrendered. This shout made Tang Sheng and the others feel a sense of panic. In order to stabilize the morale of the army, he had to shout as loudly as well. He's talking nonsense. The Mongolian army has now taken over Al City. Everyone has seen the wealth and prosperity there with their own eyes. Yes, yes. Because of Tang Sheng's words, the traders who had been slightly shaken started to nod their heads again. They then glared at Dai Quo fiercely as if saying, "You're talking nonsense, you're messing up our morale. Al City prosperous." Haha, as if he had heard the funniest joke in the world, Dai Quo looked up to the sky and laughed. Although he was also a division commander in the Far Eastern Army, he had been traveling with Yang Qindong for a while and had conquered many territories. He had seen a lot, and the prosperity of Al City was not worth mentioning in his eyes. Although he had not been to Chichen City, just the prosperity of the beginning city was many times better than Al City. After laughing for a while, Dai Quo seemed to have finished expressing the laughter in his heart. Then he looked at Tang Sheng and the others with disdain and said, "In your eyes Al City might be very busy, but right now, it is not in my eyes. Taking a step back, what does the prosperity of Al City have to do with you? Do you really think that the Mongolians will treat you as their own and give you benefits?" Tang Sheng's face was a little ugly. Of course, he knew that the Mongolians were always on guard against him. In the past 3 months he had felt it deeply in Al City. However, at this moment when the armies were about to clash, he definitely could not admit it. Not only that, he had to praise the Mongolian army. Only then would he be able to raise their morale and obtain victory. After hesitating for a few breaths, Tang Sheng opened his mouth and said, "Why can't you give it to us? I might as well tell you that Hulahan has already agreed. In the future Al City will belong to us. Other than our families, our people can also move in." What? Did the Mongolian Great Khan really say that? If that's the case, it's a great thing. In an instant, the Far Eastern Army soldiers started to mutter and discuss. Previously, because the city was too small and could not accommodate so many people, Qin Bo made the rule that other than soldiers, ordinary people could not enter the city. It was also because of this that it attracted all sorts of complaints and caused Tang Sheng to rebel. Tang Sheng also grasped this point, which was why his actions had gained the support of more soldiers. It was only because of his call that more than 3,000 soldiers joined his side. This was Tang Sheng's trump card. The reason why he was so confident that he could face the Far Eastern Army with just 10,000 cavalry was also because of this reason. Right now, everyone was discussing animatedly and the public opinion was obviously leaning towards his side. In order to stabilize the situation and also to speed up Dai Quo's defeat, he intentionally looked at the Mongolian General Ulu and said, "If everyone doesn't believe me, you can go and ask General Ulu." Ulu had never heard that the Mongolian army wanted to take control of Al City with Tang Sheng. However, he was not stupid enough to deny all of this. He thought that as long as he won the battle, he could do whatever he wanted. He immediately laughed and said, "That's right, General Tang Sheng is right. The Great Khan did say that he was willing to take control of Al City with the brothers of the Far Eastern Army and share the world." "You're lying." Just as Wu Lu finished speaking and Tang Sheng's expression relaxed, Dai Quo shouted loudly, "Stop it!" Dai Quo shouted. He did not expect Tang Sheng to be so shameless. Furthermore, this Mongolian general was actually lying through his teeth. He had already received the telegram. The Mongolian army had already left Arching after looting the place. How could he say such a thing? Knowing that the other party was lying, Dai Quo could not let him continue. After he interrupted the other party's words, he said loudly, "Everyone, don't listen to their nonsense. Truth be told, the Mongol army has already left Al City after a round of inhumane pillaging." Nonsense. Dai Quo's words immediately caused Ulu and Tang Sheng to refute in unison. One of them was one of Hulahan's favorite generals, while the other was entrusted with an important task to deal with the Far Eastern Army. With such a status, how could he believe that Hu Lihan had already betrayed him? The two naturally did not believe it, but Dai Quo, who had received the news, laughed and said, "I knew you wouldn't believe it, but don't worry, there will be evidence in front of you soon. Come on, release the signal." Chapter 1390. The so-called signal was a dazzling firework. Although the effect was a little worse during the day, the loud noise and the scene of the explosion in the sky could still be clearly seen. After the firework was released, rumbling sounds could be heard from the ground. At the same time, a Mongol cavalry scout quickly came to General Ulu's side. "General, we've discovered the enemy. About 4,000 enemy cavalry suddenly appeared behind us. They're flying the 5-star Army's flag." An excellent scout would be able to quickly determine the number of enemies. Just from this point alone, this scout was qualified. However, he only came to report after the rumbling sounds of the war horses. It was too late, so he did not pass. "Bastard, why did you only report back now?" Wu Lu cursed angrily and lashed out with his horsewhip at the scout. The scout had a wronged expression on his face. He wanted to say that the enemy cavalry was completely covered in green leaves and could not be seen unless they were right in front of them. But at this moment he no longer had the chance to speak because behind them, the bright 5-starred flag that could not be ignored was already in sight. They had already arrived at the battlefield. When the scout came to report, the Mongol cavalry had already put up a basic resistance. However, when faced with the elite 1st Cavalry Army, how could these Mongol cavalry be a match for them? In just one charge, hundreds of corpses were thrown to the side. Just as they heard the sound of hooves, the 5-star army had already arrived in front of them. When they got closer, they could see that some of the war horses still had green leaves on them. Camouflage and infiltration was one of the training courses of the 5-star army. Furthermore, they already knew the location of the battle, so it was not difficult to enter the battlefield without being discovered. "Everyone listen to my orders, stop." Beta Persei's loud voice sounded out, and the Mongol cavalry immediately stopped. Their formation was neat and orderly, and it was obvious that they were well-trained elites. They did not make a sound, and other than the snorting of the horses, there was no other sound. They all waited for Beta Persei's next order. There was a kind of aura that made people admire him and fear him, not daring to look at him directly. For example, right now there was a person who had such an aura. His chest was straighter than ever, and his footsteps were steady and sonorous. His gaze was clear and transparent, as if he could look straight into the depths of one's heart. In fact, whether it was a war or a fight between two people, the key to victory was one's mentality. When facing an enemy, he would have the absolute aura of a cat against a mouse. When he was the number one in the world, he would definitely crush his opponent. Then he would win. Although there were only 4,000 cavalry under Yang Er's command, they gave off a feeling that they were an invincible army with thousands of men and horses. They were both cavalry, but in comparison the Mongol cavalry was much weaker. This could be seen from the shock on the Mongol soldiers' faces. Without comparison there would be no harm. The 5-star army's military formation was neat, and they were all dressed in the same uniform. Their sabers were of the same length and size, and under the sunlight they emitted waves of cold light. Even when he was riding on a horse, he was still riding horizontally and vertically, giving people a very shocking visual impression. The formation wasn't trained for nothing, and the effect was very obvious. Not only did it make the soldiers more self-disciplined, but it also made them better at following orders. Just their mental appearance alone gave people a lot of pressure. This. When more Mongol cavalrymen looked at the 5-star army and didn't know how to describe their feelings, Ulu opened his mouth. "Everyone, don't be afraid. They only have 4,000 people. As long as we charge forward, victory will belong to us. Let's see who dares." Beta Persei faced Ulu's shout, and after a loud shout, the 4,000 5-star army raised their sabers high, and a soul-shaking aura surged out. There were less than 2,000 Mongol cavalrymen left, and they were completely shocked by the aura of the 5-star army. At this moment, they found that they didn't have the courage to take a step forward. As the commander of the army, Ulu naturally saw everything. Because of this, he cleverly didn't take a step forward. Instead, he looked at Tang Sheng and said, "General Tang, let's go together. As long as we can destroy these Han reinforcements, the main force of the Mongol cavalrymen will arrive soon. At that time, no one will be our opponent." Ulu wanted Tang Sheng and the others to charge first, and then he could sit back and reap the benefits. In his eyes, even 10 Far Eastern Army soldiers weren't as important as a Mongol soldier. Tang Sheng wasn't stupid. How could he not see Ulu's intention? However, he didn't dare to act rashly. Putting aside the fact that he had already witnessed the might of the 5-star army when he sent reinforcements to the first city, there were still more than 20,000 soldiers of the Far East Army staring at him. Under the shout, Tang Sheng didn't move. Beta Persei saw everything inside. With his personality, since he had brought the army here, of course, he would kill to his heart's content. What Mongol army? What Far East army? He had never placed them in his eyes. They were just a bunch of mobs. As long as he wanted, the 4,000 warriors of the world's first cavalry army could kill all of them. However, he couldn't do this. Before he came, the young master had instructed that the construction of the Far East region needed people the most. A large number of young people. The people in front of him were all strong laborers. They were indispensable talents to build the city and consolidate the territory. If he killed them, who would build the city and who would repair the roads? In order to complete the task given by Yang Qindong, it was impossible to kill a lot of people. However, he could still kill a chicken to show respect. He had to do it. Some people were like this. If you didn't kill them, they wouldn't know fear. However, before he took action, Beta Persei still needed to do something. This was very important to destroy the enemy's morale, establish the final victory, and even unify their hearts. Come, bring them here. Beta Persei didn't give the order to attack immediately. Instead, he shouted to bring people. Soon, the 5-star army soldiers escorted 2 men to the battlefield. They arrived in front of the open space between the 2 camps. Of the 2 people, one was a skinny man wearing a Mongol army uniform, and the other was a middle-aged man who looked to be in his 40s. Both of their faces were pale, and they were trembling with fear. As soon as the 2 of them were brought out, there were 2 loud shouts from the battlefield. Tuobashir? Li Hui. The one called Tuobashir was the Mongol soldier. He had another identity, which was General Ulu's personal guard. Previously, he didn't follow the army out of the city because he wasn't feeling well. Instead, he stayed in all city. The one called Li Hui was Tang Sheng's clansman. When the Tang residence's treasures were stolen and his clansmen were killed, Li Hui wasn't in the residence, so he escaped death. These 2 people, because of their special identities, were targeted by Yang Xie's intelligence personnel in all city. They were captured alive and sent out of the city. Last night, Yang Heir had already sent someone to pick up the 2 of them. What he wanted was to use their mouths to tell the truth. He wanted Ulu and Tang Sheng to see what kind of person the great Khan Hulahin, whom they served, was. Wu Lu and Tang Sheng were naturally the ones who shouted. It was just their instinct to shout out loud. In contrast, after the 2 people who were called saw their respective masters, their tears uncontrollably flowed out. When a person brushed past death and saw their loved ones, they would definitely reveal their true feelings. General, young clan leader, it's all gone, it's all gone. Tuobashir and Li Hui didn't wait for anyone to ask. With tears and snot, they recounted everything that had happened in Al City and what had happened to their family. After that, whether it was Ulu or Tang Sheng, when they heard that Hulahin had led his troops out of Al City and fled to the Siberian region, it was as if they were struck by lightning. They stood in place, not moving at all. Although they did not know why the great Khan had retreated, one thing was for sure. They were all abandoned people, abandoned as pawns, thrown here. Ulu couldn't understand why his great Khan would abandon him. Tang Sheng's face was full of shame. He thought of how Belinsky persuaded him to send out troops. Belinsky wanted to abandon him, but at the same time he also wanted to steal his treasures. When he thought of how he had mistakenly trusted Belinsky, and how he and Li Hui were the only 2 people left in the entire tribe, he couldn't help but scream, "Belinsky, you liar, you despicable, you bastard." It was because Tang Sheng believed in Belinsky that he became a traitor to the Far Eastern Army and came to this point. But what he got was betrayal and the destruction of his tribe. If he could do it all over again, Tang Sheng would not have made such a choice. Whether it was Ulu or Tang Sheng, they both had fierce looks in their eyes as they cursed everything that had happened to them. This scene was seen by the other officers and soldiers, and all of them fell into deep thought. This was especially so for the Far Eastern Army that had defected with Tang Sheng. They thought that after joining their new master, they would be able to enjoy glory and wealth. At the very least, they would be able to ensure the safety of their tribesmen. But now, not only would they not be able to save their tribesmen, they would also not have a good ending. After all, traitors never had a good ending. The atmosphere of the battlefield changed drastically because of the appearance of Tuobashir and Li Hui. The most obvious change was that the Far East army that had surrendered had become restless and restless. Charge. With such a good opportunity, how could Beta Persei let it go? With an order, the 4,000 5-star army cavalry behind him moved, raising their sabers and urging their horses forward. The first to bear the brunt of this attack were the 2,000 Mongol cavalry. Their morale was already low, and Tuobashir's appearance had destroyed their hope. Just as their morale was at its lowest, the 5-star army charged over. How could they stop them? Chapter 1391. When the arrow formation stabbed into the Mongol cavalry camp, The resistance they faced could be said to be minuscule. This allowed the attack of the 5-star Legion Corps to go really smoothly. With just one charge, they charged into the enemy formation and no one could stop them. Block them, block them. Ulu, who finally came back to his senses, shouted at the army as he looked at Tang Sheng and said, "General Tang, although we have been abandoned, we have to kill our way out for ourselves. Otherwise, what awaits us will be worse than death." How could Tang Sheng not know? He was a traitor, and from a certain point of view he was far more hateful than the enemy. Once he was caught by the 5-star army, he would probably suffer a fate worse than death. Tang Sheng did not want to die and could not die. He still wanted to take revenge on Belinsky. He immediately waved his sword and shouted to his troops, "Everyone, follow me and kill our way out. Let's find Hulahan and take revenge." With a loud shout, Tang Sheng was the first to gallop out of the camp. The group of personal guards beside him also followed suit. However, that was it. Including the soldiers, there were only 20 or so cavalry. As for the others, including Qi Wu, Zhang Shi, and Li Dei, they all stood in place and did not move at all. The soldiers behind them also followed beside their general. They also had no intention of charging out of the battle. When the 5-star army's reinforcements arrived and Hulahan fled without saying anything, it was clear that the situation was over. Anyone with a brain would not make the decision to become enemies with the 5-star army. Other than the 20 or so soldiers, there was actually no one following them. Tang Sheng's face revealed a trace of loneliness. However, he did not blame these people. They had already followed him down the wrong path. He could not drag them to their deaths. "Come, follow me and kill our way out. Kill." Tang Sheng was determined to fight to the death. He was the first to charge towards the 5-star army. He knew very well what he had done. Even if he surrendered now, he would not benefit at all. Since that was the case, he might as well take the risk. If he could really break out, he would definitely find a way to find Belinsky and take revenge for the extermination of his clan. Surround them all, don't let a single one escape. Beta Persei was riding on a big, strong horse, his face full of excitement. After following Yang Qindong for so many years, there were fewer and fewer opportunities for him to take action, let alone the opportunity to lead an army alone. It wasn't easy for him to let go of everything and go on a killing spree. He would cherish it very much. "Come, don't waste any more time. Both of you, come at me together." Beta Persei laughed heartily as he casually pointed his broadsword at Ulu and Tang Sheng. It was as if he was looking down on the world. Attack together. After Ulu and Tang Sheng exchanged a look, they nodded in unison. Then they whipped their horses and charged towards Beta Persei. This was their only chance. With 2 against 1, their chances of winning were still very high. As long as they could capture this general, they would be able to force their way out of the encirclement. Wu Luoning had become a general among the many Mongolian cavalry. His own ability was naturally unquestionable. There was no culture at all, and one could not rely on qualifications and other resources. Those who could become generals were undoubtedly extremely capable. Tang Sheng was the same. To be able to stand out among so many people and be appointed as a teacher, his own combat strength must be very strong. Both of them were like this. Together they could be considered a strong combination. If they only fought one person, their chances of winning were quite high. At least in the Far Eastern Army, Qinbo, including the army commander, would not be a match for him. But who was Beta Persei? He was one of the 5 members of the Yang Qindong family. He had been by Yang Qindong's side all year round. Apart from being different from the rest, his own combat strength was also constantly improving. If his strength was too weak, he would not have the face to stay by Yang Qindong's side. Not to mention other things, if there was really danger, who would protect who? It was not an exaggeration to say that in the entire Yangxia, the entire 5-star army, Beta Persei was not ranked number 1 in terms of leading troops to war. He also did not have much experience, but if it was a one-on-one battle, then there were really not many people who could be his opponent. With Yang Qindong's personal guidance and the Black Knights and Dragon Guards feeding him moves every day, he was not afraid at all, even if it was just 1 versus 2. He pulled out the divine sword from his waist. When he was fighting 2 people by himself, Beta Persei not only did not take a defensive position, but also took the initiative to launch an attack. He would not forget what Yang Qindong had said, that offense was the best defense. Relying on the strength of the divine sword in his hand, Beta Persei was full of confidence as he pulled his horse forward. The 3 generals immediately fought together. Under the gaze of many Far Eastern Army soldiers, the wind from their swords collided and the blades struck each other. The 3 of them were almost all fighting openly without the slightest bit of hypocrisy. It was completely a competition of strength and technique. This kind of battle also took into account one's own physique. If one's strength was not enough, one might show signs of defeat after just one blow. If one showed a flaw, it would often cost one's life. In a battle of life and death, a little negligence and a trace of insufficient strength could lead to the loss of one's life. As generals, the three of them naturally understood this principle. Therefore, when they attacked, they used all their strength. It was a fight to the death. Ding ding dang. The divine sword in Beta Persei's hand collided twice in a very short period of time, colliding with the divine sword in the hands of Ulu and Tang Xing respectively. As the saying goes, once an expert makes a move, one will know whether or not he is an expert. In this first exchange, the three of them had a preliminary impression of each other at the same time, especially Ulu and Tang Xing, who felt the numbness in their arms after the first blow. Their faces had become a little nervous. They could feel that if they were to rely on strength alone, they would not be Beta Persei's opponent. Beta Persei belonged to the group of people with extraordinary strength. In addition, he was by Yang Qindong's side every day, eating and drinking well, and his strength was constantly increasing. In terms of strength alone, even the talented black cavalry was no match for him. Only the abnormal Yang Qindong could suppress him. It was this confidence that made Beta Persei so confident when he was fighting against two people by himself. And after using his sword to fight against two people in a row, this confidence swelled even more. Haha, great. Beta Persei also felt a slight tremor in his arm. He laughed and turned around to attack. He had no intention of resting. It was a competition of strength and he would not stop until he was dead. This person is so strong. Take my spear. After Tang Xing felt the tremendous pressure from the sword, he knew that if this continued, perhaps before he could do anything to his opponent, his arm would become red and swollen, and he would not be able to exert any strength. He simply put away his sword and changed to a spear. He swapped the red Sakura spear hanging next to his horse. The reason why the cavalry mainly used the divine sword was because it was light and flexible. For example, the cavalry required fast speed, fast attack, and fast deployment. All of these had strict requirements for weapons. It was not that they could not use a spear. In history, there were cavalry who used heavy and powerful hammers as weapons. It was just that using such a weapon would inevitably affect their speed and flexibility in combat. As a result, most people used the divine sword. However, those who could use a spear were all people who believed themselves to be strong enough to use it. Otherwise, wouldn't they be giving up on flexibility and speed? Wouldn't they be courting death? Tang Xing changed to a spear, which was enough to prove his confidence in himself and his satisfaction with his physical fitness. He wanted to use his strength to suppress Beta Persei, and then find a favorable opportunity for Ulu to attack. With the spear in his hand, Tang Xing felt as if he was the king of the world. With a loud shout, Tang Xing's chi sank into his dantian. Borrowing the power of the spear, he swung the spear at Yang Air. The spear swept through the air, causing a weak explosion. Good. Beta Persei, who was rushing over, also laughed. He did not have the slightest idea of retreating because his opponent had changed his weapon. On the contrary, his fighting spirit was even more abundant. He was afraid that his opponent would not use his full strength. Just like when he was sparring with the black cavalry, everyone was afraid of accidentally injuring each other, so naturally they would have a backup plan. It was not like this kind of life and death battle where it was either you die or I die. There was no need to worry so much. Only then could a fight be called carefree. With a smile still on his face, Beta Persei had already urged his horse to come in front of Tang Xing. His sword and spear collided several times in a very short period of time. There was a continuous sound of clashing, and because they were all so fast, it made the onlookers feel dazzled. With the length of the spear, Tang Xing was able to restrain Beta Persei's attack for a while, keeping him at a distance of 10 feet. He was temporarily out of danger. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Ulu attacked. He took advantage of the spear entangling the divine sword to launch a sneak attack and harass Beta Persei from the side. He did not expect to be able to hurt Beta Persei. As long as he could distract him, it was equivalent to creating an opportunity for Tang Xing. Although it was the first time the two of them worked together, there were few flaws between them. Perhaps they also knew that this was a life and death battle, and it would be very dangerous if they did not use their full strength. So when they attacked, they used all their strength and displayed their strongest attacks and methods. Entangled by the spear and harassed by the dagger, Beta Persei fell into a passive situation. Several times he revealed some small flaws. Perhaps it was because he was strong enough that the dagger shook off his opponent's weapon several times, but he was afraid that he would have been injured by now. If it were someone else in this position, they would probably have to call for help. After all, the 5-star army had the advantage in terms of strength. And because of the bravery and strength of the warriors, nearly 2,000 Mongolian cavalry had been disrupted and were in the middle of being surrounded. It seemed that victory was already in sight. As such, there were hundreds of 5-star army cavalry around the 3-man group battle. They were here to prevent Ulu and Tang Xing from escaping, and they were also prepared to support Beta Persei at any time. Chapter 1392. As long as Beta Persei shouted and retreated, the 5-star army cavalry watching from the sidelines would swarm forward. At that time it would not be 2 against 1 but dozens of people against 1. But Beta Persei did not complain, nor did he have the slightest intention of backing down. His identity did not allow him to back down, and the celestial sword in his hand was where his confidence lay. He had already clashed with his opponent's weapon for more than a dozen rounds. The weapons in the hands of these two generals were not ordinary iron, at least much tougher than ordinary iron. But there was a limit to how strong they were. In the face of the celestial sword made with the highest forging technology in the world, it was only a matter of time before they broke. And once the opponent's weapon broke from the middle, it would be time for Beta Persei to launch a counterattack. Now he only needed to maintain enough physical strength and rely on his arm strength to not let the opponent hurt him. The 3 weapons were still clashing and stars would appear from time to time, indicating that the 3 of them seemed to have used all their strength in each attack, and each attack was extremely dangerous. In this way the 3 of them continued to attack for another 5 rounds. Beta Persei's eyes shone brightly when he saw that there was a large gap on the opponent's weapon. He knew that the celestial sword had finally taken advantage of his advantage. The opponent's weapon would break at any time, and his opportunity to counterattack had appeared. The time had come. Beta Persei suddenly shouted, and the strength in his arm increased by a bit, so much so that it reached 90% of his overall strength. He slashed the celestial sword at the body of the spear. Under the great force, Tang Xing felt his arm tighten. Because of the great force, he almost fell off his horse. Fortunately, he managed to control himself at the last moment. When he looked up, he saw that Beta Persei had given up on him and was slashing his sword at Ulu. Good chance. Tang Xing's eyes lit up, then he gripped the spear tightly and thrust it forward. He only needed 2 breaths to stab the spearhead into Beta Persei's armor, severely injuring his opponent and capturing the most important hostage. Beta Persei seemed to treat Tang Xing as an invisible person. At this time he was slashing his saber at Ulu's body, looking like he was going to fight to the end. Ulu could tell that Beta Persei was going all out. Logically speaking, he should have urged his horse to retreat and avoid the brunt of Beta Persei's attack. For someone like him who grew up on horseback, he did not need to exert any force on the reins when advancing or retreating with his horse. He only needed to gently press his legs together to communicate with his horse and retreat in the face of battle. However, Ulu did not retreat. He needed to create favorable conditions and enough time for Tang Xing to attack. This made it necessary for him to block a few slashes from the saber. Wu Lu was confident that he would be able to block 3 or 4 attacks within 2 breaths of time, rather than holding the saber with one hand. There was no problem with his strength, Ulu was confident about this. However, the problem was that his weapon could not do it. When faced with the divine cavalry saber that could cut through iron like mud, Wu Lu's cavalry saber had already been chipped. It was only because he had been fighting hard that he did not notice it. Ulu did not expect that his weapon, which had always been very tough, would be broken in half. Therefore he still followed his previous fighting style, placing the saber on his body and defending himself. 1 hit, 2 hits. When the 3rd hit came, Beta Persei's saber slashed at the gap in Ulu's saber. Then with a crisp breaking sound, the saber broke into 2 pieces. The sudden change caught Ulu off guard. Before he could react, the divine saber had already landed on Ulu's body. The sharp edge of the saber directly broke his bones. With just 1 blow, Ulu was cut into 2 halves. Blood splattered out as Yu's eyes widened in disbelief as he fell from his horse. Even as he died, he still could not understand how his weapon could suddenly break in half. Could it be that this Han general knew some kind of magic? Ulu was dead. He was cut in half and died in an extremely miserable manner. Blood also splashed on Beta Persei, but for Beta Persei, who had been on countless battlefields and killed countless enemies, he did not care at all. As if he had done an extremely simple thing, he turned around and prepared to deal with another enemy, Tang Xing. It was also at this moment that he felt something poke his body. It did not hurt, so he immediately turned around to look. Beta Persei turned around and looked at the spot where he was stabbed. He saw a broken spearhead, Tang Xing who was holding the spear, and the other party's frightened eyes. Just now, Beta Persei had used up 2 breaths of time to kill Ulu, which created enough opportunity for Tang Xing. Next, he unceremoniously raised his spear and stabbed, with a victorious smile on his face. It was not until the spear stabbed out that his expression suddenly changed. He did not feel the tip of the spear entering his body, but only the feeling of the blade piercing into a hard boulder, unable to move forward. At the same time, Tang Xing's gaze quickly turned to the tip of the spear. At some point, the tip of the spear had been broken, leaving only a wooden handle. At this time, the wooden handle was stabbed towards Beta Persei, and it hit the other party's exquisite armor. Beta Persei, who had been by Yang Qindong's side all year round, could be said to be a treasure from head to toe. Just like the armor he was wearing, it was thin and extremely hard. Yang Xie's munitions factory spent a lot of effort to make it. Such armor was also very rare in the entire 5-star army. With Beta Persei's status, it was naturally not a problem for him to get one. The spear was stabbed into the armor, unable to move forward. Tang Xing was still in the same position, his face full of surprise and confusion. Humph! Seeing that Tang Xing's spear had stabbed into his armor, Beta Persei's face was full of anger. Originally, Tang Xing had betrayed the 5-star army Yang Xie and the young master, causing him to want to kill him. Now that Tang Xing even wanted to kill him, this person could not be left alive. Beta Persei, who had already killed Ulu, gently turned around and easily moved the spear to the side. Then the celestial saber slashed through the air and slashed towards Tang Xing's neck. War has always been cruel, either you die or I die. Beta Persei was furious. The saber was as fast as lightning. When Tang Xing came back to his senses, he had only just raised the spear when the wooden spear was cut in half. The saber did not continue to fall and fell on Tang Xing's neck, then quickly slashed. Blood gushed out like a fountain, and Tang Xing's eyes gradually became blurred. At this time he seemed to have seen the scene of him growing up with the help of the tribe when he was young. He also seemed to have seen the scene of him joining the Far Eastern Army and eating his first full meal. Then he rose step by step and finally became a division commander. Then, his ambition began to grow, and his heart became unsatisfied until he did the wrong thing of betraying the Far Eastern Army. Tang Xing was dead. Even when he died, his eyes were wide open, and he looked like he could not die in peace. No one knew what he was thinking before he died, and no one knew if he would regret his wrong actions and thoughts. With Tang Xing's death, the soldiers he brought with him immediately became obedient. Especially the more than 3,000 soldiers who had just chosen to surrender to him, their faces were full of regret. If they had known that this would be the result, why did they stand out? Weren't they courting death? Nearly 2,000 Mongolian soldiers, half were killed and the other half were captured. More than 10,000 rebels from the Far Eastern Army were surrounded by Division Commander Dai Qua and 20,000 soldiers, and all of them chose to put down their weapons and surrender. Even Ulu and Tang Xing were not a match for them. Unless they did not want to live, who would dare to raise their swords against them? The rebellion was thus quelled, but the matter was not over. How to stabilize the people's hearts and win them over was an important task for Yang Qindong after arriving in the Far Eastern Province. After 3 months of chaos and arching, Yang Qindong arrived. Along with him were thousands of 5-star army's elite cavalry, thousands of Mongolian captives, and thousands of ordinary Russian tribesmen. When Yang Qindong led the army into Al City, whose city walls weren't very tall, all he saw was a mess on the streets and chaos on the ground. On the streets, he could see the corpses of ordinary people lying on the ground. There were old people, women, and children. Many of them had been conquered by the 5-star army. They were the people who had come to support the Far Eastern Province, but they did not expect to die in such a chaotic situation. Along the way, Yang Qindong's expression became uglier and uglier. These were his people, and they had actually died in the city. He had to take revenge for Hulahan. Fortunately, after inspecting the corpses, he discovered that there were very few Han people. Later on, Yang Qindong understood the situation in the city. When the Mongolian soldiers killed and looted, the few Han people in the city chose to hide. They threw away all their money in order to save their lives. These Han people persevered. As long as they were still alive, everything would still be there. Bugnam of Gojoseon would definitely bring them a better life. In order to survive, after the Mongol soldiers left, some of the criminals in the city started to pillage and kill. These Han Chinese once again chose to band together. They picked up their weapons and became a force to be reckoned with. As long as they did not take the initiative to find trouble with others, no one would find trouble with them. This was how they managed to survive until Yang Qindong's arrival. As Yang Qindong entered the city, the law and order in the city quickly stabilized. On the streets, the soldiers of the world's #1 cavalry army were patrolling the streets. They were dressed in neat military uniforms, riding on tall horses and wielding divine weapons in their hands. Whenever they discovered someone doing something illegal on the streets, they would immediately lash out with their horsewhips and capture them. There was no room for discussion. Chapter 1393. The impartiality of the 5-star army soldiers shocked some of the rebels and made them more obedient. However, there were still some daring people who took advantage of the fact that the 5-star army's numbers were not high. They gathered their forces and attacked the patrolling soldiers of the 5-star army. They attacked with dozens of people and even hundreds of people. These people were mostly white-skinned Russians. They took a liking to the soldiers' uniforms and sharp sabers, as well as the sturdy war horses they were riding. Facing the provocation and the rebels who were shouting and holding weapons such as sabers, sticks, clubs, and even hoes, the 5-star army did not hold back and killed them all. Since they dared to provoke the army, these people had already lost their humanity and deserved to die. Dozens of people or even hundreds of people could not even hold up against the charge of the world's #1 cavalry army and suffered heavy casualties. The formation was in chaos and they scattered in all directions. Those who could not escape became members of the prison. In just a single afternoon, the prison of the Far Eastern Army was filled with people. Some of the people who were caught later could only be tied up in the square outside the prison. Fortunately, it was already the 5th month and the weather was not too cold. They would not freeze to death. In troubled times, severe punishments were needed. When Yang Qindong heard the report that there were rebels in the city, he did not restrict the actions of the 5-star army soldiers. On the contrary, he supported them. He knew that one could not be merciful on the battlefield. Otherwise, one would be asking for trouble. There were some people that couldn't be reasoned with. Only continuous slaughter would make them realize their mistakes and realize the power of the 5-star army. Thus, they had no choice but to restrain themselves and become honest. While they were clearing out the unstable elements in all city and had no choice but to kill, Tianhu's 4,000 cavalrymen successfully intercepted Hulahin's troops who were escaping to the west. After a round of fighting, Hulahin brought 12,000 Mongol cavalrymen and escaped. On the other hand, Belinsky, who had too many items and could not bear to throw them away, was captured on the spot. He had personally witnessed the strength of the 5-star army. When he saw the strength of the 5-star army, the Mongol soldiers panicked and ran away with twisted faces. He saw that iron sabers and wooden spears were thrown all over the ground. The various items that they had snatched had also become burdens. They had all been abandoned in order to increase their speed. The army was defeated like a landslide. Countless Mongol cavalrymen, who were known as the strongest army, fled like sheep seeing wolves. They all exposed their backs to the 5-star army and were chased by the world's #1 cavalry army. They did not have any intention of resisting. This kind of strength only the Mongol cavalrymen and some Mongol tribes did not belong to the Mongol army. Unexpectedly, there was always someone stronger. The 5-star army was actually so ferocious that the Mongol cavalrymen could not fight back at all. Belinsky was captured, but he was not depressed. On the contrary, he felt that this was an opportunity for him. Since the Mongol cavalrymen could not defeat the 5-star army, why would he not join the strong? With such a powerful cavalry as his backing, he would not have to be afraid of anyone when he went out to do business. With this beautiful thought in mind, Belinsky stopped the resistance of the guards of the caravan. They obediently surrendered their weapons. Belinsky also reported his identity. At the same time, he put forward his request. He wanted to see the highest general of the 5-star army here. He had some information to report. Tianhu saw that Belinsky seemed like someone important. He also thought about how his teacher had just arrived and needed to understand the situation here through various channels. He also needed various people to help him complete his mission. As such, he nodded and agreed. He did not even use a rope to tie Belinsky up. He gave him a very relaxed environment and allowed him to come to Arching with him. This also strengthened Belinsky's confidence. He believed that with his own abilities he would be able to achieve great things. As for the fact that he had tricked the Far Eastern Army, that was nothing. Wasn't it like this during times of war? Today we can drink and chat happily, but tomorrow we might fight. On the other hand, today we might be enemies, but tomorrow we might be friends. To sum it up, there was no such thing as an eternal friend, only eternal benefits. Because of the 5-star Army's ruthless methods, Arching went from chaos to peace. Then, when the Far Eastern Army that had disappeared for 3 months suddenly appeared in the city, the security in the city became as good as before. As a large number of troops entered the city, some criminals who had not given up on making a fortune in the chaos had no choice but to put away their crooked thoughts. At this moment, it could be said that Arching had returned to Yang Xie's embrace. Qin Bo's condition gradually stabilized. After the army entered the city, he went straight to the city lord's mansion where Yang Qindong lived. When he saw Yang Qindong, who had taken off his golden cloak and changed into a loose green robe, Qin Bo knelt on the ground with a plop. "Young master, I've made a mistake. I failed to live up to your expectations. Get up quickly." Under Yang Qindong's gaze, Beta Persei, who came to report with him, quickly helped Qin Bo up. "You haven't recovered yet, you still have to take care of your body. Have a seat." Yang Qindong asked with concern. Although the Arching incident was lost because of Tang Sheng's rebellion, Qin Bo, who was both the commander and the governor, also had an unshirkable leadership responsibility, as well as the responsibility of not knowing what was right and what was wrong. Of course, one of the fuses that caused the incident was the mistake in his strategy of governing the city. Why did Tang Sheng rebel? Wasn't it because his people were not allowed to enter the city? This policy was set by Qin Bo. On the other hand, even if Tang Sheng didn't rebel this time, as time passed, more and more problems would accumulate, and when the contradiction became bigger and bigger, things would still happen. This was equivalent to a pustule in a person's body. If it was left alone, it would get bigger and bigger. It was better to squeeze it out and make it healthier. Qin Bo, who was sitting in the chair, had a guilty look on his face. In the past few years, the Far Eastern province had received a lot of supplies from Yangxia. In comparison, although there were some achievements, they were not very big. The rebellion this time was equivalent to erasing all of the previous achievements. He was even prepared to be removed from his position or even convicted. Even though Qin Bo was sitting on a chair, he still lowered his head as if he was in the wrong. Seeing this, Yang Qindong shook his head and said, "Qin Bo, you can be considered an old man who has been following me for a long time. Back then, when you and Wu Sheng cooperated, you had such great chemistry. No matter what mission was given to you, you could complete it very well. This young master also has high hopes for you." Wu Sheng was sent to the Golden Horde for several years. He has successfully established a cooperative relationship with some important figures in the Russian tribe and built his own Wuxia city. His actions are gratifying. As for you, this young master also has high hopes for you. I gave you the power of the governor and the commander of the Far Eastern province. You have done well, so you don't have to worry that this young master will punish you. You are innocent. In order to dispel Qin Bo's worries and psychological burdens, Yang Qindong directly settled the matter. After saying that he was innocent, even if someone wanted to impeach or blame Qin Bo, it would be useless. Yang Qindong's words were like nails on a board. In Qin Bo's ears, he was very excited. "Thank you, sixth young master, for your affirmation of my work. But Tang Xing was promoted by me. If something happens to him, I am guilty. I ask that I resign from the position of commander of the Far Eastern Army. Sixth young master, please accept my resignation." Looking at Qin Bo's stubbornness, Yang Qindong was angry and said, "This young master said that you are innocent. If you are guilty, you are just not open-minded enough. It's just a mistake caused by inexperience. It's nothing. No. The rebellion has happened. Someone has to stand up and take responsibility. This subordinate is willing to resign from the position of commander." Qin Bo's second resignation showed his determination. Meritorious service should be rewarded. Mistakes should be punished. The matter of the Far Eastern province was not a small matter. Who knew how many people were watching? If there was no explanation, then the law would be in chaos. Yang Qindong said, "Good. Since it's like this, then you will be relieved of your position as commander of the Far Eastern Army. You should focus on your work as the governor." "Thank you, sixth young master." Qin Bo, who got what he wanted, quickly cupped his fists in gratitude. He did not want to break the rules because of himself. With Yang Qindong's guarantee, no one would find trouble with him. However, there was no guarantee that no one would find trouble with the sixth young master. As far as he knew, there were many people in Crimson City who dared to speak up. Now that he was relieved of his position as commander of the Far Eastern Army, it was the same as giving everyone an explanation. He could also focus on his work as the governor. After staying here for a few years, in the beginning he had some complaints about being transferred to this godforsaken place. But over the years he had watched Al City grow from nothing, and he had developed feelings for it. If he were to transfer him away now, he would be reluctant to do so. More importantly, Yang Chendong came here. With his ability to turn something rotten into something magical, he would have a bright future in the Far Eastern province. He really wanted to follow the sixth young master and do a good job. After being relieved of his position as commander, Qin Bo seemed to be a lot more relaxed in an instant. When he talked about work, his state of mind was a lot more energetic than before. Sixth young master, although Tang Sheng's selfishness caused the mutiny this time, the fact that so many people were willing to follow him to rebel against the Far Eastern army is enough to show that our work is not up to par. The main thing is that Al City is still too small. Arranging for 500,000 people from all over the place is already a lot of pressure. We really can't arrange for other soldiers' clansmen, even for senior officers like division commanders. Some openings cannot be opened. Chapter 1394. Yang Chendong stood at the side and listened attentively. From time to time, he would nod his head to show that he understood Qin Bo's previous actions. When the other party was almost done, he asked, "Previously, I asked the Far Eastern Army to reclaim the wasteland. How is it going?" Speaking of wasteland, Qin Bo immediately perked up. "Sixth young master, according to your instructions, this is what we've been doing during this period of time. With the efforts of 500,000 people, we've reclaimed a total of 20 million mu of land in the past 5 years. The land here is really fertile. Although it's affected by the weather and can't be compared to the south of the Great Ming Dynasty where we can harvest twice or even thrice a year, the yield of crops here is very high and the taste of the crops is also very fragrant. The Far Eastern region had black soil and was very suitable for planting crops. Just like in the future, the 3 eastern provinces became the base for producing crops because of this reason." Hearing that 20 million mu of land had already been reclaimed, Yang Chendong nodded heavily. "Not bad, your work is still very effective." Finally being praised, Qin Bo's expression became a little better. At least he wasn't completely useless. At least he didn't let down the work he had done for the past few years. Right this time, the Mongolian cavalry suddenly appeared. Has the food been hidden properly? Yang Chendong suddenly thought of a very important question. Next, he wanted to develop the Far Eastern region. This wasn't just because of the bet he made with Yu Mian. Most importantly, this was an important chess piece for him to enter Europe through the land route. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Therefore, he decided to personally set up the troops here to establish a solid bridge to enter Europe. It's all hidden. Only the commanders and I of the Guard Regiment know the location. Even the other commanders don't know. You know that the soldiers of the Guard Regiment are all Han Chinese. Most of them are youths from Crimson City. Some of them are from the Cold Front. They are all trustworthy. This time the food is intact. This is enough to prove everything. Good, this matter is well done. If one wanted to develop a place, they had to solve the problem of their stomachs first. If one couldn't even fill their stomachs, how could they talk about development? How about this, take out all the food. Next, whether it is building a city or repairing roads, we will need a lot of able-bodied men, and able-bodied men can eat the most." Hearing that the food was fine, Yang Chendong breathed a sigh of relief. At the same time he felt more confident. Build a city? Qin Bo was stunned. This was the first time he had heard of such a thing. Yang Chendong smiled and nodded. That's right. If we want to develop the Far Eastern region, just one Al city isn't enough. These 2 days I also looked at the terrain here. Although the city can still be expanded, it's very limited due to geographical reasons. Since that's the case, it's better to build a few more cities. Only in this way can we arrange more people in the city and solve the worries of the soldiers. Only with a unified mindset can we be motivated and quickly develop the Far Eastern region so that this place can finally reach a state of self-sufficiency. After saying this, Yang Chendong seemed to have thought of something. He sighed and said, Qin Bo, the importance of the Far Eastern region is far more important than you think. In the future, this place will become an important strategic location like Bieni City. In the future, if we expand from here to the west, it's definitely impossible to rely on external logistical support. Therefore, building a strong logistical foundation here is the most important thing right now. It can be said that the prosperity of the Far Eastern region is directly related to how big the blades of the 5-star army can expand in the future. Hearing that the Far Eastern region was so important, Qin Bo was shocked. He originally thought that Yang Qindong had his eyes on this place because it was sparsely populated and could become a new granary for Yangxia. Therefore he put all his focus on reclaiming wastelands. But now, after hearing this idea, he realized that his vision was still too limited and his thinking was too petty. Yang Qindong saw Qinbo's shocked expression and understood. He sighed again and said, "Calculating the time, Wuxia has been in the Golden Horde for 7 years. The reason why he hasn't been transferred back is to wait for the right time to let him, this chess piece, display his greatest power. And if we only manage the territory in the Far East, then wouldn't his efforts over the past few years have been in vain?" I see. Qinbo finally understood that the construction and development of the Far Eastern region wasn't done on a whim by the sixth young master. It was planned as early as 7 years ago or even earlier. Yang Qindong felt that there were some things that could be said more seriously today, so he looked at Qinbo and asked with a serious expression, "Qinbo, the 5-star army's territory is already big enough, so why are we still expanding? I'm sure the people below must have a lot of opinions about this." Qinbo didn't want to talk at first, but looking at Yang Qindong's serious expression, he could only bite the bullet and say, "The people below have some opinions. But it's not the majority, there are still more people who like to work with the sixth young master. Especially some young people, they still want to build military achievements and are afraid that there won't be any more wars to fight. Wouldn't their years of training be useless in the end?" Hee hee. Yang Qindong laughed when he heard Qinbo's explanation. Young people wanted to build their careers, so they naturally wanted to participate in wars. Only then would they have a chance. But other than them, there were probably more people who didn't want to continue fighting. After all, peace was what everyone wanted. Other than a few extreme people, no one wanted war to happen. If it was possible, why would Yang Qindong want to start a war? He wanted to be with his wife and children, and it would be great to have a family reunion. But reality didn't allow him to do so. This was because he wasn't sure how long Yangxia could maintain her glory. In history, the Great Ming Dynasty was the center of the world. Other than the land of the Great Ming Dynasty, the other places were just barren lands. The things of the Great Ming Dynasty were the best, and the people of the Great Ming Dynasty were the most advanced race. Then, the 2 Opium Wars completely woke the Chinese people up. It turned out that we weren't the most advanced. It turned out that the Europeans had almost robbed the whole world. It turned out that we were already far behind. Then what were we doing? Didn't we know? We knew. Since the Tang Dynasty, China had been the center of the world. During the Song Dynasty, the southeast coast was full of Arab merchant ships. At that time, the Song Dynasty had begun to transform from a primitive natural economy to a market economy. It was even more so during the Zhou Dynasty. When Jianghu went to the Western Ocean, who didn't admire him? Many countries were proud to be able to pay tribute to the Great Ming Dynasty. But that was it. When the Great Ming Dynasty entered the Yingzong Dynasty, it was equivalent to entering the middle of the Ming Dynasty. After that, it was a downward slope. In the end, it was covered by history and was ruled by a group of Tatars who only had millions of people. How sad it was to think about it. If Yang Qindong stopped now, he couldn't guarantee that his descendants wouldn't be destroyed one day, and they wouldn't be ruled by other foreign races. In order for that day to not appear, he had to work harder now. For example, when the world was unified and the Han people became the rulers, even if his descendants failed to live up to expectations and lost the world, the people who could replace them would definitely be Han people. It could be considered as meat rotting in a pot. Not many people could understand his thoughts because they had never experienced it before, so they couldn't think of it. Yang Qindong was different. History had already told him everything. When he was young, he had thought that if one day he had the ability, he would definitely let those foreign races know that the nobility of the Han people was not to be blasphemed. He would also not forgive those people for their actions. He could not forgive the foreign races for invading China when it was declining. He could not forgive the tolerance of China for being used as an opportunity for them to make a comeback. He couldn't forgive them for leaving behind a mess every time they came and left. He could not forgive their betrayal, their despicable actions that were worse than pigs and dogs. As early as the era of Confucius, Zhou Wanghan was forced to the brink of destruction by the war hounds. The western capital Chang and fell, and King Ping moved the capital to Luoyang, barely surviving the crisis. It was in that year that countless Chinese women were humiliated by the barbarians. Their blood was stained with tears and their corpses were a warning to us, warning us not to be merciful to the foreign races. The results of the Spring and Autumn War, taking advantage of the internal divisions of China, the Xiongnu flourished and led the barbarians to invade China. They burned, killed, and plundered, committing all kinds of crimes. This blood debt had been settled for many years, so it was time to settle it. And this settlement work would be completed by him. As for those who said that he was militaristic, that he killed people like scything flax, that he ostracized the foreign races, that he didn't have the magnanimity of a large country, that he didn't have a broad mind, that was up to them. Yang Qindong had his own principles, and now that he had the ability, he had to do everything he wanted to do. He had to do it to the best of his ability, to the extreme. Qinbo left in the end. He was removed from his position as the commander of the Far Eastern Army, but there was no bitterness on his face. On the contrary, he was excited by Yang Qindong's words about developing the Far Eastern region, because this proved that his time had come. 2 days later, Tianhu won the battle and brought the captive Mongolian cavalry and Belinsky's caravan to Al City. Qinbo knew about Belinsky. This person had a good head for business, and his business was very big. In the past Al City he could be considered one of the top merchants. Of course, he would not forget that it was this person who instigated the 4th Division's commander, Tang Sheng, to attack the Far Eastern Army. Now that he heard that this person had been captured, he quickly went to find Yang Qindong. He wanted this person to die and take revenge for the thousands of soldiers who had sacrificed themselves. Chapter 1395. When Qinbo arrived at the governor's mansion, he saw Belinsky standing in the reception hall, meeting with Yang Qindong. Yang Qindong sat high above and looked at Belinsky with great interest. He was the only one standing in the middle of the field. On his left was Beta Persei, and below him were Tianhu, the 1st Cavalry Division's division commander Taimur, as well as the Far Eastern Army's 1st Cavalry Division's division commander Dai Qua and the others. After Qinbo arrived, Dai Qua and the others immediately greeted him. Then he stood together with them and listened to Belinsky, who was standing in the center of the room, speak with fervor and assurance. This Belinsky was quite capable. In terms of language, he could speak Chinese, Russian, and Mongolian dialects. At this moment he was speaking very fluent Chinese, which did not sound awkward, about some of the strange stories in Siberia and some of the things he had encountered in the mountains. Belinsky's face was very calm, and he even introduced himself proudly. King Wunan of Damyang, this humble one's home is in Siberia, and I've seen many Mongolian troops burning and looting everywhere. They're a group of bandits and they only know how to snatch good things. Of course, in their eyes, anything that is useful is a good thing. They really look like they haven't seen the world. When he was working with the Mongolian army, his words were full of flattery. He said things like the Mongolian army was the strongest army in the world, and the Mongolians were the noblest people in the world. However, when it came to belittling them, he did not give them any face at all. Those who did not know would think that he had a deep grudge with the Mongolian army. In fact, in the entire Siberia, Hulahin is not the only Mongolian cavalry. As far as this humble one knows, there are 7 or 8 other forces of different sizes. The only difference is that compared to Hulahin, they're poorer and weaker. Apart from that, there are also a few native Russian tribes. Some of them have become quite powerful and have their own protection teams. If it weren't for the fact that they lack weapons and battle experience, they wouldn't be much weaker than the Mongolian cavalry in terms of numbers. Respected King Wunan of Damyang, this humble one can contact these people, and we've done business with them in the past, so we have some friendship. As long as you give the order, this humble one can bring your greetings to them. I'm sure that at that time, everyone can form an alliance to deal with the Mongolian cavalry. Honorable King Wunan of the great Ming dynasty, this lowly one has traveled to various places as a merchant. I am very clear about where there are small paths and where there is a main road through which an army can march. If your majesty needs, this lowly one can present a self-drawn map at any time. It will certainly play a big role in your majesty's control of the situation there in the future. Respected King Wunan of Damyang, this humble one, Belinsky was like a long-tongued woman who didn't know what fatigue was. He kept his mouth open for more than an hour, to the point that his saliva was flying everywhere and his lips were starting to crack. Finally he shut his mouth. Perhaps there were still some things that he hadn't said, but based on his experience he had already said a lot. This was enough to please this young Bugnam of Gojoseon. As for taking out everything in his heart, only a fool would do such a thing. Since the two of them were working together, he had to keep some trump cards. Otherwise, how could he fight for the initiative in the future? Seeing that Belinsky had finally shut his mouth, Yang Qindong smiled and nodded with satisfaction. Then he looked at Ba Daojiang and said, "Take him away. He's tired. Don't let him talk too much. Let him draw out the map of Siberia that he knows." "Yes, Ba Daojiang replied. He had already seen the meaning in Yang Qindong's eyes. He had to properly entertain this foreign profiteer and dig out all the things in his head. At the very least, he had to make sure that he wouldn't cooperate. Under all kinds of torture, he wasn't worried that he wouldn't open his mouth. Ba Daojiang agreed, but Belinsky didn't understand. He raised his right hand and shouted, "Wait, respected King Wunan of Damyang, you haven't said how we should cooperate." Cooperate? Why should we cooperate? Yang Qindong laughed as if he had heard the funniest joke in the world. You don't want to cooperate? If you don't cooperate, why should I draw a map for you? A trace of panic appeared on Belinsky's face. When he was talking about himself, he didn't say where he came from, but, I. Perhaps this was his true thought. In his heart he did not respect Yang Qindong that much. It was only because the situation was not as good as Yang Qindong that he had to say this. You know how to draw a map. Seeing that Belinsky still wanted to make a fair deal with him at this time, Yang Qindong laughed loudly. He was confident that after Ba Daojiang made his move, the other party would soon know why the flowers were so red. At that time he would say what he knew, and those who didn't, he would talk nonsense. Yang Qindong's eyes revealed a look of disdain. He was treating Belinsky as a captive, which made the merchant unable to remain calm. He was originally a little flustered, but now he shouted, "No, you can't treat me like this. I'm here to discuss business with you. If you do this, it will make me disappointed." Wrong, you're not here to discuss business with this king. You're this king's captive. You were captured by Commander Jianghu. Everyone can testify to this. Yang Qindong couldn't allow the other party to slander the reputation of the five-star army. Although they killed people like flies, they still had their reputation. He would still keep his word to his friends. Belinsky suddenly remembered that he was indeed brought here by Jianghu. Although he chose not to resist the five-star army's cavalry, and even wanted to use the opportunity to meet Yang Qindong to prove his ability and practical value. However, it was also true that he was a captive. From the looks of it, he had miscalculated. He couldn't use his status as a captive as an excuse. He rolled his eyes and shouted again, "I'm a big merchant of the Russian tribe. I have many powerful friends in Siberia. If Bugnam of Gojoseon wants to harm me, do you think it will anger them? Once they join forces with the powerful Mongolian cavalry, I'm afraid Arching will change hands a second time." Belinsky's face was full of threat as he spoke. He was just short of saying, "Uncle B is very angry and the consequences will be very serious." Are you threatening me? Yang Qindong was stunned at first, and then he looked up to the sky and laughed. The other high-ranking officers of the five-star army in the other halls couldn't help but laugh out loud as if they had heard the funniest joke in the world. Belinsky blushed as he looked at everyone. Although he didn't know what he had said wrong, he knew that these people were looking down on him when he saw how they were laughing. He thought that if he didn't argue now, he would be captured by the ferocious five-star army. His life would be worse than death, so he needed to save himself. Just as everyone was laughing, he suddenly shouted, "Don't think that I'm joking. Let me tell you, many tribes are still waiting for me to do business with them. Without me they won't have a trade route. They will get angry and become enemies with you. How about this? Let me go immediately, and I'm willing to donate all my wealth. I will go back and tell those tribes that the five-star army is friendly and that Bugnam of Gojoseon is great. I guarantee that they won't have any ideas about you." It was half a threat and half a plea. When things didn't develop as he expected, Belinsky really panicked. He was afraid of death because he had money. He was more afraid of death than anyone else. When he realized that money couldn't save his life or bring him glory, his heart was in a mess. "Oh, you still want to continue trading with those people? Do they have money?" Yang Qindong finally asked with interest. His efforts didn't go to waste. Belinsky wasn't afraid of being asked questions, but he was afraid that the other party would ignore him. He immediately became spirited and said, "Respected Bugnam of Gojoseon, although they don't have money, they have things that we can trade with. For example, they live in the mountains all year round, so they have good tiger skin, tiger bones, tiger penis, tiger meat, ginseng, and all kinds of animal fur. They are all good things and are very valuable outside." "Oh, they have good things, so it's worth it to trade with them." Yang Qindong nodded in satisfaction. Then his gaze fell on Belinsky and said, "But you don't have to make such a trade. Our Yangxia has many excellent merchants. You just need to tell us the locations of those tribes. As for your assets, they were seized and will definitely be confiscated. Also, you colluded with Tang Sheng and the others to destroy our Arching and kill this king's people. This debt needs to be settled. Alright, take him away and treat him well." Make him spit out everything in his stomach? If he doesn't say anything, just kill him. Yang Qindong waved his hand impatiently. Ba Daojiang, who had been waiting at the side, strode forward and lifted Belinsky, who weighed more than 50 kilograms, out of the hall. Even after they left the hall, Belinsky was still screaming like a pig being slaughtered. You can't do this to me. Otherwise you'll definitely attract the anger of the other tribes. You'll definitely regret it. No one took Belinsky's threat seriously. Regardless of whether it was the Mongol or Russian soldiers, if they didn't come, why would the 5-star army look for them? If they surrendered, everything would be fine. Those who were guilty would be punished, and those who weren't would be given land to farm. They would be squeezed dry. Chapter 1396. Thank you to Moral Student 609 G Pingon and Blazing Flame for their monthly votes. Thank you to Longzi. Over the years, who had the 5-star army feared on the battlefield. After Belinsky was taken away, the hall became much quieter. However, seeing the excitement on the faces of Qinbo and the others, it was clear that they were happy to treat someone who had brought disaster to the Far Eastern Army like this. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Yang Qindong also decided to talk about the problems of merchants. Before, the Far Eastern province had been busy with two things. One was building a city and the other was reclaiming land. As for the matter of merchants, it had been ignored. This was not to say that merchants were not important, but before they had a place to live and food to fill their stomachs, who would have time to do business? With a light cough, Yang Qindong shifted everyone's attention to himself. He said, "Without agriculture there is no stability, and without merchants there is no wealth." This king does not need to say more, everyone knows this. If the Far Eastern province wants to become powerful, it cannot avoid using trade routes. Later, this king will send a telegram to encourage some Yangxia merchants to come and develop here. When the time comes, everyone will have to cooperate. Understood? Yes. Yang Qindong's words were equivalent to an order. Everyone nodded in agreement. In this era, merchants were not looked down upon. They were seen as people who reaped without sowing. And scrupulous merchants were what people generally thought of them. Yang Qindong did not agree with this point of view. It was too arbitrary to say that merchants were lowly based on the fact that they only cared about profits. Wasn't it said that all merchants in the world came for profits, and all merchants went for profits? Back in the pre-Qin era, people had this understanding. Why did everyone still think that only merchants cared about profits? In his opinion, it was not merchants who cared about profits but everyone in the world. It was necessary to allow, prevent, guide, restrict, and use at the same time. Just like you the Great controlling the flood, it was better to guide it than to block it. We can develop commerce, we can develop industry, we can liberate the productive forces, we can liberate the mind and everything that can be liberated. Yangxia cannot do without commerce, and even more so cannot take commerce lightly. On the contrary, commerce and agriculture should be placed on the same level of importance. The only difference was that it was based on agriculture and focused on commerce. For the places that we can't go for the time being, we can let the merchants be the vanguard. Through the merchants, we can control everything in those countries and we can control everything in the merchants. Some people would think that capturing captives and serving the corvée is inhumane, not benevolent and righteous enough, and not enough to show the demeanor of Yangxia. In the face of these doubts, Yang Qindong threw them aside for the time being. Innovation meant that he had to go through a process from not understanding to understanding. In this process, he did not intend to listen to other people's opinions. In his mind, there were too many successful experiences of the later generations. He just needed to use them and did not need to prove them. Since that was the case, why would he need to listen to other people's opinions that were not correct? With the momentum of his own words, Yang Qindong passed the decision to develop the Far Eastern region in the future. This was the benefit of him building his own empire. If he believed that something was right, then there was no need to discuss it with others, and there was no need to listen to other people's opinions. Usually, only the founding emperor could enjoy this kind of treatment. Even in the second generation, it was difficult to do things so happily. From time to time, there would be people who would use the ancestral rules and regulations to stop the wise ruler from doing things that would benefit the people and the country. The matter of the merchants was put aside for now. When the real merchants came, Yang Qindong would have a good talk with them. Not only did he need the merchants to pay more taxes, he also needed to understand the situation of the various forces in Siberia through these merchants. He believed that they would definitely surprise him. After Belinsky was taken away, Yang Qindong got someone to bring over a sand table while everyone was still around. He brought up the matter of building a city and building a road that he had discussed with Chen Bo. Pointing at the sand table, Yang Qindong said loudly, considering the Far Eastern region's vast territory and sparse population, it is impossible to completely control this place with just arching. This king has decided that apart from arching, we will first build 4 cities. They will be in Ding City in the northeast of Mount Alloy. That will become the core of the Far Eastern region's northeast. After the city is built, we will use it as a starting point to develop it. It can also become the granary of the Far Eastern region and provide all kinds of food. Build a Han city south of Arching, which is near the Stanov Mountains, Outer Xing'an Mountains. It will be a huge transit station that will be responsible for the future communication between the Far Eastern region and the Han. Build Tongbei City south of the Han city by the Urguna River, near the present Moa. It will be an important hub that connects the 3 eastern provinces. In the future, the resources sent from the Yangtze provinces will all pass through here. It will be more convenient and faster, and it will also reduce the losses on the road. Build Alei City west of Arching in the Upper Yansk Mountains. It will be the front line of the military and constantly monitor the various weapons factions in Siberia. Once they have any intentions, it will become the western gate to prevent them from sending troops to the Far Eastern region. This will ensure the safety of the rear and allow for peace of mind. After pointing at the 4 places, Yang Qindong put down the baton in his hand and looked at everyone present. Choosing these 4 places wasn't just because of Yang Qindong's whim. It was a combination of distance, geographical location, mineral resources, water sources, and whether the surrounding land was flat or not. It was based on the development of the Far Eastern region in the future. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that even if there was a fake beast, it would be impossible to find a more suitable place. No objections. Everyone shook their heads and said. Among them, except for Qin Bo who had experience in governing a place, the others were all generals. They only knew that wherever Yang Qindong pointed they would fight there. Good, then it's decided. Yang Qindong also knew that talking too much about this topic was like playing the lute to a cow, so he simply decided to be direct. After choosing the location, it was time to arrange the manpower. During the Zhou Ming dynasty, there was no so-called industry and technology was not developed. Many things needed a large number of people to complete. For a huge project like building a city, it was unknown how much labor was needed to complete it. For example, in the previous Al city, there were 500,000 Yangtze citizens and tens of thousands of Far Eastern Army soldiers in the city. It only took them a year to build the outline of the city. When the city had a scale, it was already a few years later. Labor was indispensable in building a city. The more the better. The great man Grandpa Mao once said that there was strength in numbers. This also explained why it was easier to do things with more people. Al City, which had just experienced a riot, now had a population that was 20% less than before. In other words, there were only about 400,000 citizens. Thus, it was easy to imagine how difficult it would be to complete the 4 new cities before the arrival of winter. At least at this time, Qin Bo lowered his head and didn't say anything. He had experienced this kind of thing before, so he knew better than anyone how difficult it would be. On the other hand, the other generals didn't care. They believed in Yang Qindong. Since the 6th young master said that it could be built, it would definitely be built. As for what to do, it was still the same sentence. They only needed to do what he said. No one said anything. Yang Qindong didn't point to anyone to answer his question. He opened his mouth again and said, "Has the food been transported to the city?" The sentence was, of course, directed to Qin Bo. Previously, he had hidden the food because he didn't have much confidence in the safety of Al City. But now that Yang Qindong was here, Qin Bo naturally felt relieved. He didn't believe that there was anyone in the world who could take something away from the 6th young master. The food has been transported to the city. Now all the large granaries in the city are full. There are still many stored in the original cellars. Qin Bo said with his chest puffed out and his head held high. This was the only thing he was proud of in the Far East for a few years. Good. The rest of the food doesn't need to be transported to the granaries in the city. Just divide it into 4 and send it to the other 4 cities. Yang Qindong nodded. With enough food, he had enough confidence to do things. Tianhu, when you go back, distribute the horse meat that died in these battles. You can also form a hunting team and go into the dense forests and deep mountains to hunt wild beasts. At the same time, you can also let people go down to fish. Remember, don't take the small fish. Even if you catch them, you have to put them back. If you want to catch, you have to catch the big fish. The next work will be very tiring. It won't be enough to just have food without meat. Yang Qindong looked at Tianhu. But these words were also for everyone to hear. As the saying goes, the emperor doesn't lack hungry soldiers. If you want a horse to run, you have to feed it grass. The horse's mane and tail had to be kept. They were strategic resources. The horse couldn't be wasted. Although it couldn't be made into leather armor, it was still better than nothing. The soldiers of the 5-star army couldn't use it, but it was still a hot commodity if sold to ordinary people. Horse meat was, of course, the most precious. It was shaved off from the bones and mixed with wine to detoxify it. The taste was very good. The bones of the horse couldn't be thrown away. They were thrown into the pot to make soup. It was one of the world's delicacies. Then the bones were smashed open. The bone marrow inside was so fragrant that it made people bite their tongue. The internal organs of the horse were also good things. The heart, liver, spleen, stomach, and kidneys could all be cooked together. The large intestines and small intestines were also one of the best ingredients. A pot of horse offal was also a famous dish. When the time came, coupled with the game obtained from hunting, the meat problem could basically be solved. This was the case for this year. However, they couldn't always use this method in the future. If they hunted more, the number of wild beasts would naturally decrease. If the fish were too small, they couldn't catch them. Otherwise, it would be very difficult to eat fish in the future. Since they had decided to develop in the long run, it was impossible to not have a long-term vision. The kind of fishing in a pond would only be done when there was no other way. Chapter 1397. After the food problem was solved, Yang Qindong's next speech revolved around 3 major points. First, build 4 cities to ensure that everyone could live in the cities and have their own houses to keep warm before the winter snowfall. Second, build roads. The roads between the 5 cities, including Arching, had to be built so that 3 carriages could pass side by side without congestion. Only in this way could they ensure the smooth flow of information and ensure that if one side was in trouble, there would be reinforcements from all sides. Third, continue to cultivate wastelands. The commander of the new Second Army that followed Yang Qindong not only escorted a large amount of supplies and tens of thousands of soldiers, but also millions of Yangtze's people. The more people there were, the more food they needed. If there wasn't enough land, they wouldn't even be able to solve the problem of food and clothing. How could they talk about development? It should be mentioned here that the Zhu Ming dynasty still hadn't completely solved the problem of the people's bellies. This wasn't because they didn't work hard, but because the difference between the output of the land and the food that the people needed was too big. For example, in the current Great Ming dynasty, other than potatoes, 1 mu of land could only produce a little more than 1 dan of grain per year. But how much grain could an ordinary young man eat in a year? A full 5 dan. In other words, 5 mu of land was needed to feed a young man. In this way, it would be strange if there wasn't enough grain to eat. Often people would only be half full. This was also the reason why people at that time always looked sallow and emaciated. In contrast, the reason why Yangtze didn't lack grain was because the land was large enough. Compared to their small population, the proportion of land was still very high. Secondly, they had high-yield crops like potatoes, sweet potatoes, and corn. These crops could easily produce 7 to 8 dan, 10 dan, or even 20 dan of grain per year. The emergence of these crops greatly alleviated the problem of Yangtze's lack of grain. Not only that, they could also be sold to the outside world. This was all because they had a good foundation. In addition, Yangtze had built many greenhouses. Even in winter, there were still vegetables to eat. This made many Yangtze territories no longer have the concept of no vegetables in winter. Naturally, food was not a problem. Yang Qindong proposed 3 general directions and began to arrange the work. As the governor of the Far Eastern region, Qin Bo was naturally responsible for the construction of the 4 cities. Tianhu's 1st Cavalry Army was responsible for the defense of the battlefront, hunting in the forest and fishing in the water. In short, he was responsible for the supply of meat. The new Second Army's 1st Cavalry Army was responsible for the reclamation of the land and the construction of winter greenhouses. Yang Qindong would personally oversee the construction of the roads. He also wanted to take advantage of the time when the roads were being repaired to take a look at the mines and minerals in the area. He wanted to prepare the raw materials for the construction of the factories in the future. After the meeting, everyone received their tasks and began to get busy. At the same time, the first batch of laborers was brought to the 4 cities in batches. Qin Bo personally led them, and the Far Eastern Army soldiers were responsible for escorting them to the 4 cities. These laborers were mainly Mongolian captives. Other than that, there were also soldiers from the Far Eastern Army's 4th Cavalry Division. They had followed Tang Xing onto the wrong path, and now it was time for them to redeem themselves. There were also people like Qi Wu Zhangmian and Li Dei who had joined Tang Xing later on. It must be said that they had been wronged. They had made the wrong choice at the last moment and now they had become criminals. They needed to serve in the military and return to their original identities. Other than these laborers, Yang Qindong also allowed the people of the Far Eastern region and the various tribes to participate. As long as they worked, whether it was building cities, repairing roads, or reclaiming land, they would receive corresponding rewards. After that, they would use the Chinese currency printed by Yang Xie to buy food and daily necessities from the 5 cities. These people could also apply to join the Yang faction, but they needed to apply in advance. After that, their performance would depend on their performance. If they proved that there were no problems within 3 months to half a year, they would be issued a special identity certificate issued by the Yang faction. With this certificate they would be considered good citizens. Mobilizing the people and making them work for one's own use, this was the successful experience of the later generations. However, it was still a first, and once the news came out, it attracted a lot of discussion and influence. As long as the people lived under the leadership of any faction, they would need to serve in the military. It's free labor just because it's your job. If they did not perform well during this period, they would be scolded and beaten. This was regarded as a matter of course by the people. In the Yangxia faction, not only was this exempted, but if you were willing to work, you could also receive a high wage. Some people calculated that if 2 people in a family of 5 were willing to work to earn wages, then they would be able to support the family and ensure that the 5 of them would not starve. If 3 people were willing to work, then they would be able to eat their fill and wear warm clothes. Although it was still far from a well-off life, it was still considered an ordinary family. At the end of the year there would still be some savings. Therefore, when this policy began to spread, especially by the local people like Nikolai who supported the 5-star army, more and more Russian people who were hiding in the mountains began to come out and rush to the nearest Yangxia city. Never underestimate the power of the people. Especially under Yang Qindong's proposal, all the labor paid would not be calculated by the day, nor by the month, but by the value of the labor. In other words, the people who could work would earn more, and the people who could not work would earn less. A contract responsibility system was implemented. In this way, the enthusiasm of the people was greatly aroused. Not only did the people earn more money and live a better life, but it also increased the speed of the construction of the 4 cities and the development of the wasteland. When Qin Bo heard the progress of the work from his subordinates, he was stunned. If this method could have been used during the construction of Arl City, the city would have been a completely different sight now. Of course, this was just Qin Bo's imagination. Some of the innovations were not something he could think of. He did not have Yang Qindong's influence, nor did he have his decisiveness. If the same thing was done by him, when some of the policies were implemented, it would inevitably lead to all kinds of discussions and doubts. In short, the reforms were not something that could be changed by just anyone. It also depended on the specific strength of the person who implemented it. Half a month later, the commander of the mercenary corps finally arrived at Al City. Not only did they bring 1 million Yangxia people with them, but they also brought all kinds of rare materials. For example, explosives to blow up mountains, cement to pave roads, and so on. At this point, the entire Far Eastern region fell into a heated atmosphere. Everyone's faces were filled with hope for the future. Facts also proved that there were no lazy people in the world. When they felt that the effort and the reward were proportional, everyone would unconsciously unleash their potential and do everything well. When small things were done, they would become big things when put together. The development of the Far Eastern region entered the fast lane. It was even faster than Yang Qindong imagined. Not only did the people of the Far Eastern region respond positively, but the tribes hiding in the mountains also came out. Even the people of Siberia who heard the news crossed thousands of mountains and rivers to come here. They wanted to have something to eat, to not be frozen in winter, and to have a safe haven. Yang Qindong adopted a reward system for these foreign people who came because of the reputation. Those who came first could only be slaves. After that, they had to work hard and contribute enough to become commoners. In the end, they could get rid of their temporary identity card and get an official identity card of an ordinary citizen. If there were people who performed well, they could be promoted to Han citizen. One of the reward systems was that they could report people who were doing bad things. This way they could find all suspicious people through supervision and there would not be any loopholes. At the same time, if they were serious about their work, they could often exceed the quota and lead others to do better. They would be seen as role models. Also, if they were to spread rumors, they could attract more people to be used by the 5-star army. These were all meritorious deeds that were of great help to the evaluation. With the perfection of the system and mutual supervision, many people with unknown identities were quickly found out. After the investigation by the Security Bureau, they found that most of them were spies from the Mongolian army and belonged to various forces. There were also a few spies from the large Russian tribes. They doubted the authenticity of the 5-star army building a city in Dali and sent people over to investigate. For such people, Yang Qindong ordered his men to release them. He even asked his men to show them around the city so that they could have a better understanding of what the 5-star army was doing. This would make it easier for them to make the right choice. What made people not know whether to laugh or cry was that there were spies from Baiming and southern Ming among these people. It was really difficult for them to come here from thousands of miles away just to see what the 5-star army was doing. When Beta Persei reported the discovery of spies from the Great Ming dynasty to Yang Qindong, he could not help but sigh. It seems that both Baiming and southern Ming have already seen me as a great enemy. Forget it, it won't be long before I deal with them anyway. I'll just detain these spies. If they're willing to stay, I'll arrange jobs for them and see what happens. As for those who refuse to change, I'll just kill them. Yang Qindong did not boast that he was a saint. He would never be soft-hearted towards his enemies. If he did not do so, he would not be able to achieve the great goal of the world and the supremacy of the Han people. Chapter 1398. Thank you, Moral Student 609 Yuan Zinan's monthly votes and rewards. Wangzi thanks you. The work in the Far East region was in full swing. The results were much faster than the original plan and all the work was progressing at a high speed. Compared to the changes in the Far East region, under the leadership of Tiger's Man and Yumian, the mining work had already started after spring. Because they had already investigated and knew the approximate location of the mines, the mining work went very smoothly. A large amount of the resources needed by the Yangtze were mined. Other than a portion left in the first city, the rest were sent to Chichen City for effective use. The battle in the Li region also achieved some results. The most important thing was taking down Yi Erqiang's tribe. The newly established New 5 armies had also received a public call from Yang Qindong to praise them. The first army led by Shuang also turned a small victory into a big victory in the Li region. After Prime Minister Ali Pu was captured by the intelligence department of the 5-star army, King Bao Lide felt that he couldn't do anything by himself. In the end he made a difficult choice. He submitted to the Timur Empire, which was far away from them, and requested for them to send troops to help him. The actions of the 5-star army had already attracted the attention of the Timur Empire. Especially after the new 5-star army took down the Yirqiang tribe and sent troops to the Yusang region. Although they hadn't really fought from the direction of the troops, a huge battle was unavoidable. Without the lips, the teeth would feel cold. Even if it was to ensure his own safety, the Timur Empire couldn't watch the 5-star army grow stronger. At this moment, the actions of the 5-star army were very similar to their ancestors. Genghis Khan and his descendants attacked and occupied one after another. In the end, the land was so big that people didn't dare to look at it directly. Their territory spanned from the Irtysh River in the west to the Sea of Okhotsk in the east. In the east, they owned the northeastern part of the Korean peninsula. In the southwest, they included the Kashmir region, Bhutan, Sikkim and other places in the southern foot of the Himalayas, northeastern Myanmar and northern Thailand. They swept through Russia and Ukraine, reaching Kiev, the current capital of Ukraine, and the Danube River. They destroyed the Germanic army in Hungary and forced their way to Venice in Italy. It had a land area of 44 million square kilometers. The performance of the 5-star army led by Yang Qindong was even better. No one was willing to see such a huge monster appear. It could be imagined that it wouldn't take long for the Timur Empire to make a move. As for whether they would send an emissary to dissuade them or directly dispatch troops, that would depend on the development of the battlefield. Let's talk about the Navy. Since they went to sea in March, they have been invincible all the way. The battleships were equipped with the most advanced cannons. In addition, the new ships were much faster than the ships of other forces. The Cold Front Navy was almost invincible. In just 2 months, they had conquered Sumatra in the south and Manchuria in the north, completing the task of controlling the Straits of Malacca. Following which, they headed straight for Sri Lanka, following the route that Zheng He took when he went to the Western Ocean. The difference was that the Cold Front Navy was much more ferocious. Wherever they went, there was either submission or death. There was no third choice. The situation was very good. Yang Qindong, who was in the Far East, was relieved and wholeheartedly directed the road construction. With Beta Persei an all-round deputy, Yang Qindong only needed to take care of the general situation. This also gave him more time to look for various minerals. There were some maps in the warehouse that recorded the relevant information. With this, he had already led people to find 3 large mines. Conservatively, one of the iron mines could meet the needs of the Far East for the next 30 years. The rest could also be used to support the armament factory in Chichen City. When the news was sent back to Chichen City, several teams of experts quickly set out. The current armament factory was developing very quickly, resulting in a shortage of resources. If they could really solve the problem of raw materials, it could be imagined that the development of the armament factory would soon reach a new level. Time passed month by month. In the 9th month of 1461 AD, good news kept coming. In the 9th month, the 6th Madam Wan Xiaoyu gave birth to Yang Qindong's second son. In the 10th month, Xiao Yuxue gave birth to a son named Yang Jun. A few days later, Dong Xiangxiang gave birth to a daughter named Yang Nuo. In the 11th month, Tuoye gave birth to a daughter named Yang Ting. Not long after, Sumaner gave birth to a son named Yang Zhao. In the 12th month, another 2,000 gold pieces were added. They were the pure daughter Yang Xian at the beginning of the month and Hu Yan's daughter Yang Lin at the end of the year. That's right, the year 1461 was considered a bumper harvest year. This bumper harvest did not only refer to the great progress in various aspects of military and local politics, but also the expansion of the royal family. In 3 months there were 3 more men and 4 more women. It had to be said that Yang Qindong's ability was very good. After staying in Chichen City for a few months and working hard, there was finally a return. The only regret was that Yang Qindong could not rush back. At this time, it was snowing heavily in the Far East. The 4 newly built cities could finally be put to use. Although the city walls had been built in a short period of time, the number of houses in the cities was still a little low. Yang Qindong had no choice but to take out the auditorium that was built first. Although it was a little crowded and noisy, the floor of the auditorium was still warm, which brought a sense of joy to all the foreign people who were temporarily staying here. Since young, they had never stayed in such a warm room before. They didn't even dare to think about it. But now, everything had come true. It was no wonder that everyone was so excited. Even when they were squeezed together, no one had any complaints. Including Al City, the appearance of a total of 5 cities brought a ray of warmth to the Far East in the cold winter. After the families of all the soldiers were properly settled, there were no other voices in the army. Especially after Yang Qindong brought up the slogan of making a new contribution, in order to change himself and his family's living conditions, all the soldiers were thinking about one thing, and that was when they could go to war, when they could go to the battlefield, and let them have the opportunity to make contributions and receive rewards. Their fighting spirit was brewing, and they were only waiting for a suitable opportunity to release it. At that time, the fighting spirit of the 5-star army would be unstoppable. The cold winter would pass and spring would come. At the same time, it brought news from Yang Xie's caravan. The map of the Mongolian army in Siberia had been sent to Yang Qindong. Looking at the 2 cities of Ust Kilima and Greater Ust Koj, Yang Qindong's calm eyes flashed with fighting spirit. After finally finding the 2 main forces of the Mongolian army, Yang Qindong's fist landed on the table. Beta Persei, summon General Tianhu and General Sherbei for a discussion. 1462 AD, end of the 3rd month. The snow had just started to melt and white snow could still be seen everywhere. The 5-star army had already gathered in Alii City. Soon after, under the command of General Yang Qindong, nearly 100,000 soldiers set off. They brought enough rations and equipment as they left the city. They wanted to make a name for themselves. After hearing the news that the 5-star army had already set off, many of the foreign race youths who stayed in the 5 cities had yearning, envy, and unshakable determination in their eyes. The treatment of the soldiers of the 5-star army was something that they had witnessed during this period of time. Excellent equipment, generous treatment, lofty status, respected social status, all of these were things that made people jealous and envious. They had also joined the army. In the past, they had worked hard for their tribe and some had worked hard for the Mongolian army. However, that was because they did not have enough food to eat or warm clothes to wear. How could it be compared to working for the 5-star army? The difference in status and treatment caused the 5-star army soldiers to be filled with a sense of honor, and they were filled with the spirit of a master. One could imagine the spirit and fighting ability of this kind of army. It was not something that the Mongolian soldiers who were just trying to make a living could compare to. This kind of army was naturally very attractive. Regretfully, slaves did not have the right to sign up for the 5-star army. At the very least, they had to be commoners. If there were many people signing up, they would need to be commoners. Just like that, many of the slaves who had just joined Wuxia not long ago lost the chance to join the army. Thinking about the treatment of the 5-star army soldiers and the delicious rice and food that they would occasionally help out in the army, one of the slaves could not help but drool. At the same time, he made up his mind to perform well and become a commoner as soon as possible. This way he would have a chance to join the 5-star army in the next recruitment. Reward system, good treatment, and social status. These were the changes that Yang Qindong had made to the military system. In a subtle way, it solved the problem of the lack of soldiers. Compared to the other factions who moved for the king and shut up for the country, it was much more practical. Everyone had their own selfish motives. When they were respected and their lives were greatly improved, perhaps they would have more thoughts and their realms would increase. However, if someone did not even have enough food to eat or warm clothes to wear, what was the difference between saying loyalty to the king and serving the country? Even if they said these things, how much could they agree with it in their hearts? If they did not agree, how could they be proactive? Thinking about it, one was to be forced to go to war, and the other was to want to make military contributions and perform well on the battlefield. If these two armies met, what would the result be? Even an idiot would be able to guess who would win and who would lose. Yang Qindong brought the 5-star army with strong fighting spirit and left the Far East region, bringing the envy and yearning of countless people into Siberia. At the end of March, due to the geographical location of Siberia, the weather in Siberia was not as warm as in the south. It was only warm around noon when there was plenty of sunshine. At other times, especially at night, it was still very cold. As the snow melted, the roads became muddy and difficult to walk on. Chapter 1399. Any other army would not have chosen to set out at such a time. The damage to themselves would be far too severe. But for the 5-star army, the effect was very ordinary. Once the soldiers got used to this method of marching and got used to the environment and weather, it only took them 2 days to recover. Although their boots would still kick up mud when they stepped on the road, it no longer hindered their advance. Unlike the people of that time who liked to wear cloth shoes, those who were better off would wear leather boots, those who were worse off would wear straw sandals, and even those who were poor would go barefoot. The soldiers of the 5-star army all wore leather boots that were the same size, allowing them to protect their feet to the greatest extent when they were marching, allowing them to walk in the forest full of boulders without suffering any injuries. Every soldier was given a standard sleeping bag, a water bottle, a wash basin, a bedding, a raincoat, a cotton coat, and so on. When they needed to use it, they would open it. When they were not using it, they would store it in a large bag and carry it on their backs. In this way, they did not need to worry about the cold and slippery roads, allowing their movement speed to be unaffected by the weather. Just this set of equipment for each soldier cost around 10 taels of silver. Multiplied by the number of nearly 100,000 soldiers, this was still a huge sum. At the start, because this work required a lot of money, there were some people who objected, but Yang Qindong reasoned that soldiers had to shed blood in battle. Right now, they were just paying a bit more to ensure their safety on the road. What was not worth it? What could be compared to a human life? As soon as Yang Qindong's questioning voice came out, all the opposing voices disappeared. When this matter was spread, all the soldiers were moved to tears. Following this kind of commander, what complaints did they have? What reason did they have not to risk their lives? The speed of the army continued to increase, and they got closer and closer to their destination, Great Wuxia, or Great Wuxia for short. This time, the initial goal of the expedition was to conquer 2 big cities. Yang Qindong adopted a strategy of dividing the troops into 2. To the north was the Lima city of Ustchi, also known as Ustchi City. The army there was led by Tianhu, the commander of the world's #1 cavalry army. He led 40,000 cavalry and 300,000 civilians as logistics support. The second group was personally led by Yang Qindong and consisted of more than 30,000 cavalrymen under the command of the new Second Army, as well as 20,000 men from the newly established Russian Division, White Division. At the same time, 300,000 civilians were supported. The so-called Foreign Russian Division referred to a foreign army composed of Russians. For example, Nikolai, whom Yang Qindong first met, served in this division. They were the first to join the five-star army and were infected by everything the other party had done for them. They had a common trait, which was that they were young and strong. They had once been the protectors of their small tribes. Now that Yang Qindong had unified the Far East, building cities, repairing roads and opening up wastelands, their lives had changed. They could no longer hide like before and could finally walk out in the open, build their homes and live safe and hopeful lives. As these young guardians, they joined the five-star army with the support of the patriarchs and elders of their respective clans, all for the sake of fighting for a future for themselves and for the glory of their own clans. Almost every one of them had come with the hopes of their tribes. This made them more eager than anyone else to enter the battlefield and receive better praise. This was also the reason why Yang Qindong had abandoned the gradually forming Far Eastern Army and instead formed this foreign division. It was important to emphasize that the Far Eastern Army was left behind in the Far East for this war. After nearly a year, Qin Bo had finally been reinstated and became the commander of the Far Eastern Army. They were left behind to defend the 5 cities and at the same time, to supervise the civilians under their rule to not cause trouble, which would allow them to work better. According to Yang Qindong's request, there had to be a village with a population of more than 1,000 people within 200 li of each city. In his mind, it was impossible to rely on only 5 cities to revitalize the entire Far East. The role of the cities was to lead the way and those villages were the points. In order to make the entire Far East prosperous, there had to be enough people. Speaking of which, the 20,000 foreign troops had performed very well along the way. It was as if they knew their identities and were afraid that they would be looked down upon. They were doing their best to perform at every moment and strive to show their best side so that the great Ming dynasty's martial South King, the Grassland's Heavenly Khan, would take a good look at them. Maybe one day their performance would be good enough to catch his eye. Then they would walk to the peak of their lives. The result of performing well was that the speed of the army increased. The journey that was originally scheduled to take nearly 2 months was completed in 1 month, which was twice as fast. It was the end of April, and the mountains in sight were covered in a layer of light green. The trees had begun a new cycle of growth, and the grass had also sprouted and stubbornly pulled out of the soil. Great Raven City. The weather continued to warm up, causing the city to emit a trace of vitality. The city gates opened and the bazaar opened. Many merchants walked into the city. Many commoners also began to barter in the most primitive way. Ahuli called himself the Khan of Zhongxing, and the Great Raven City was the main power under his rule. With the city as the center, the area that stretched out for 500 li was his territory. His general Shikai was an unstoppable enemy. Relying on this general, Ahuli used nearly 10 years to become the overlord of this area, with 20,000 cavalry under his command. To be able to command 20,000 elite soldiers in Siberia, where the weather was harsh, was enough to make Ahuli feel proud. As such, in this place he was like a god and his words were like an imperial edict. No one dared to go against him. Ahuli could be considered an anomaly among the Mongol Khans. He was not like the others who only knew how to kill and think of ways to rob when they ran out of things. He was someone who placed great importance on production and construction. For example, the Great Crow City under his rule had very good public security. Not only did the soldiers not offend the common people, even the merchants who passed by would happily let them pass as long as they paid the taxes according to the area. The safety of the merchants within a radius of 500 miles was guaranteed. As such, the Great Raven City was relatively prosperous, and many nearby tribes even chose to live in the city after understanding the situation. This made the Great Raven City one of the most prosperous cities in the area. Whenever Ahuli walked out of his residence and saw the bustling scene in the city, he would smile and be in a good mood. Great Khan, the city is like this because of you. As expected of the Son of the Heavens, you love the people like your own children. You should let us learn from you and imitate you. Seeing that Ahuli was in a good mood, Shikai quickly flattered him with a look of worship. Ha ha ha. Ahuli, who was praised like this, laughed out loud and said humbly, "This is not enough. This Khan is thinking whether or not we can lower the taxes for the people. They have suffered too much." Sigh. When he heard that the taxes would be reduced, Cycle's expression changed, and his eyes flashed with an inexplicable anger. If it was in the past, he would definitely speak up to stop it. Although the taxes in the Great Raven City were a bit high, reaching 5% of the taxes, they protected the people. However, they had ensured the safety of the people. This was something that could not be bought with money in this chaotic world. Speaking of which, this was not the first time Ahuli lowered the taxes. Originally, it was 7% of the taxes. Every time it was lowered, Cecil would object. If this went on, it wouldn't be long before the food in the city's storehouse would dwindle. Wouldn't it be dangerous if a war broke out? This time Shikaer did not speak up to stop it. He only hesitated for a moment before saying, "This is the great Khan's action of caring for the people. It is admirable." General, you don't object? Originally he was already prepared to give up if Shikaer opposed it. In fact, this time he didn't have any hopes of passing this resolution. He was just testing the waters and he would continue to raise it. Once he raised it enough times, it wouldn't be good for Cecil to keep opposing it. As long as Cecil agreed once, the taxes would naturally be reduced. It was because he was prepared for a long battle that Shikaer did not object, which made Ahuli feel a bit uncomfortable. Very quickly, when he saw that no one objected, he immediately seized the opportunity and said, "Since the general agrees, then this matter is settled. We will lower the taxes by 10%. In the future, 4% of the taxes will be enough." "All right, the Great Khan will make the decision." Shikaer replied without any change in expression. The matter of lowering the taxes was actually settled so easily. Ahuli was in a good mood and returned to his residence with a group of bodyguards. Zikar also rode back to his residence. Not long after he returned, another captain, Bushi, walked into the study and saw General Zikar sitting in his chair like a golden blade. The two sat facing each other. When there was no third person in the study, Shikaer opened his mouth. "Brother Bushi, did you know? The Great Khan lowered the taxes again." "What?" Bushi, who was about to pass the cup of horse milk to his mouth, heard this and his expression changed. He then said with some agitation, "It's still going to be lowered? There are very few merchants in the city and we don't take care of the land like the Han people. If the taxes are lowered, what will our army eat?" It was no wonder Bushi was so agitated. Although 5% of the taxes in the Great Crow City looked very high. But in reality there were very few people who could actually pay the taxes. In ancient times, taxes were mainly collected for merchants and farmers. The Mongols were not good at farming and only merchants paid the taxes. However, there were only a few merchants in the city. If they relied on them, it was impossible to feed the 30,000 cavalry. Now that the taxes were lowered, did they want the soldiers to patrol with empty stomachs? You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.